It all started when Zhao Tianlei was brutalized by the local bullies one horrible day. They didn't like his attention to Shen Xin. Suddenly, they stopped their attacks. A major from Huazhong College, Lin Mu, stopped them. He explained that he only did it for the sake of their classmates, and he was no better himself. He put his foot on Zhao Tianlei's chest and threatened him that if he saw him near that girl, he would break his legs. After all they had done and said, the boys left. He stayed lying on the ground, as if telling himself that he was going to get revenge for this. Zhao Tianlei stood up, grabbing his aching head. He realized that if he didn't hurry up and was late, it was all for nothing. The tuition would be lost. When he tried to get to his feet, he accidentally stepped on a very unusual ring that glowed blue. He didn't notice it, of course. That's why he fell on his back again. He was in a lot of pain from all the beatings, and it was not the first time they had attacked him. Suddenly, the virtual god communicating with his master O through the ring spoke. He said that Zhao Tianlei must save humanity from zombies. Of course, he didn't immediately believe it, thinking that the ring was from some MLM company, and was sure that if he paid for it, he would be considered a savior. He thought it was stupid, so he immediately threw the ring on the ground and wanted to trample it. But it said that if he put it on, he would understand everything. For fun, he decided to do it without hoping for a miracle. And then, the scanning started, which started to take him somewhere, which scared him crazy. His eyes began to light up, and what looked like a whole computer system had been built into him and was about to start projecting something in front of him. In this state, he was able to see what would happen in 16 hours. All the streets were on fire, people no longer behaving appropriately. The virus had just consumed them. Survivors fell to the ground, trying to hide from the zombies, but it was clear there was no escape. It was waiting for absolutely every Earthling as the virus spread. And now, he was back to reality again. Zhao Tianlei opened his mouth in surprise, unable to believe what had happened. It seemed unimaginable, but so real to him. Ring hurriedly explained to him what he had witnessed was the end of the world. The ring hastened to explain to him that what he had witnessed was the end of the world. After hovering for a few seconds, Zhao Tianlei came to his senses. He thought that it was all an evil joke, so he got angry and tried to take off the ring, but it didn't work. Incredible pain racked his body. He was warned that he could not remove it himself. It would be dangerous to his life. After he puts the ring on, it connects to his body and tells him not to kill himself. He just didn't realize how he could handle a zombie. It was explained to him that since he had been chosen by the system, he would not be left with nothing. All he had to do was rub the ring and start the storage space inside. Then a black cube appeared in front of him. It had a system of exchanging resources and weapons, the system of purchasing through the death of zombies, experience accumulation, and so on. There was also an evolutionary fluid that can only be used when a virus gets into the body and turns a normal person into a zombie, saying that if the zombie sent him to the other world, the liquid wouldn't help, the ring was going to hibernate. Zhao Tianlei didn't realize it in time, but it was too late. Realizing that the end of the world would come in 16 hours, Zhao Tianlei came to the dormitory urgently to prepare for it. He was very shattered. His friend was waiting for him there, who was incredibly angry and scared because he had found out that he had missed his college classes without taking time off. He was worried that something had happened to him. Zhao Tianlei was not ceremonious and placed his bag on the table and warned them that tomorrow was the end of the world and the dormitory building was the safest place. It was obvious from their faces that they didn't care about this information. It seemed like a joke, even though he was shouting and his hands were shaking. He was very sad that no one believed him. His friend tried to hold back as much as possible, but in the end they all just laughed at him. Two of them just started making fun of him, saying that he was stupid for overplaying zombie games, and that's what gave him this neurosis. They started pushing him around and scorned him, citing that they were uncomfortable being in the same room with such a loser. Eventually, they left for the internet cafe. His best friend did not support their relationship, but still condemned Zhao Tianlei, not understanding about how he could say such stupid things. But he couldn't stand it any longer, so he decided to explain the details to his friend, Wu Bin. He felt that if he was his friend, he was obliged to listen to him. And of course he couldn't refuse him. After Zhao Tianlei shared with him everything that had happened in the forest, they barricaded the door with all the chairs. If Zhao Tianlei remained alert at all times, watching the door and armed with a mop, Wu Bing was sleeping drooling with 2 mops in his hands. When he woke up, he wondered how he was still holding on since it was already dawn, but he realized that the enemy was coming, so he had no time to sleep. But his friend didn't agree at all, as if he didn't care about his life. He got up saying that he could not sacrifice his sleep and would go to bed. When he started to leave, there was a knock on the door. He thought their roommates had returned and thought it was silly because they had come in from the street at dawn without zombies. Zhao Tianlei was looking at his ring and couldn't understand how it happened because he was sure of the zombie apocalypse. Wu Bing went to open the door for them. But then they realized that something had happened because they heard cries for help outside the door, that something crazy had happened. This made them very suspicious. That's when Wu Bing finally believed him. He fell to the floor in fear, his face expressing horror and wild fear for his life. Panic gripped him from head to toe. When they looked out the window, they were horrified. What they had feared for a whole century, what they had tried to avoid and what had come anyway, had happened. People seemed to go crazy. Their behavior was strange and inexplicable. They were throwing themselves at each other, biting and twisting. Lifeless bodies were visible. Then Wu Bing was finally convinced that everything his friend had said was true. He fell to the floor, afraid to even continue looking out the window. He became hysterical and started sobbing, afraid that they would become zombies too. Zhao Tianlei tried to calm him down, saying that they should wait out the outbreak and escape. Eyes filled with terror looked at him. Wu Bing thought it was cruel because their neighbors Zhang Jun and Li Liang were still outside and needed to be saved. As much as Zhao Tianlei didn't want to say it, self-defense was more important than anything else. Their neighbors would have to be searched, and there was a high chance of getting killed. He noted that the zombies under their window hadn't evolved yet, so they still had time. Besides, they couldn't miss a lesson in self-learning. Suddenly, Wu Bing was thrown into a sweat. He remembered one very important thing. Shen Xinyu was to be filmed that day at the playground. Many people went with her. When Zhao Tianlei heard this, he was furious and couldn't understand why she had gone there. He explained that due to the weather conditions, the plans had temporarily changed. He added that he knew he liked this girl, so he was sure he knew about these things. But the man didn't listen to him anymore, taking his broom in his hands and heading for the exit. He said there was a fire axe on the first floor, and he had to get it. Wu Bing didn't like the idea very much and didn't want to go out. Zhao Tianlei pointed out that they could only escape with weapons, and thanks to the axe, they had a chance to escape and resist the zombies. He knew that his friend would be useless because of his fear, so he told him not to open the door to anyone. He promised to come back to him if he could survive. Wu Bing was shocked to hear that he wanted to leave him. He didn't plan to leave the room, but he was scared to be alone. Before he could leave the apartment, his friend called out to him. After some thought, he decided to go with him, so he had a better chance of survival. He said he could not leave his man who had become like a brother to him. He promised to help him, as he had helped him before, and to stay out of the way. Zhao Tianlei was very pleased to hear these words. He smiled slightly and allowed Wu Bing to go with him to save the people. At least it would become less lonely. When they left the room into the hallway, they saw zombies. It was a good chance to explain that fighting these creatures is dangerous. You just have to hit them in the head. And of course, after that, it is necessary to run away, because zombies have excellent hearing, and the impact will be heard by their entire pack. A few of them were already on them. Rushing at full speed down the stairs, Zhao Tianlei stopped at the landing to retrieve the axe from there. He had to hurry up. When they jumped out into the street, they saw hundreds of lifeless bodies. Sitting next to them were people who probably cared about them. It was a horrible sight. While Tianlei was surprised at how many of them there were, Wu Bing closed his eyes and could barely contain his gag reflex. He was so frightened by the rotting bodies and how disfigured they were. Finally, he overpowered himself and opened his eyes. His gaze was immediately caught by their classmates standing at the podium, who were panic-stricken at the sight of the zombies. He noticed that their headman was there, but couldn't figure out whether Shen Xinyu was in the crowd or not. Tianlei was just thinking about what to do and how to save them. He had a brilliant idea when he saw a van nearby. He told Wu Bin that he would steal the van and distract the zombies, and he would have to get the people away. But his friend was adamantly opposed to him distracting the zombies alone because he was afraid they would send him to the afterlife. He couldn't let that happen. There was much more heroism in Tianlei, so he still stood his ground, asking his friend to believe in him and let him go. He was sure he could do the job. As he ran away, he added that if he didn't return, he would find and take care of Shen Xinyu. He needed someone to protect her for sure, someone he trusted. He used the axe to break down the door of the van, started it up, and drove straight at the angry mob of monsters. It wouldn't do much to kill them all, but it would distract them. Meanwhile, Wu Bing went to his classmates, shouting to them that they should go down instead of waiting for death to catch up with them. He had to keep his word. The headman was very surprised that Wu Bing was so brave and saved them, but he hurriedly told her that the zombies were distracted not by him, but by Zhao Tianlei. She was startled to hear this, as she saw a huge crowd of monsters following the car. He tried to stop her, saying that she was already causing enough trouble. He asked her to take the people to the library while he helped Tianlei. Wu Bing promised her that they would come to them, but later, when they had dealt with the devilry. He really needed help, because the zombies were all over the van and wouldn't let him move. It looked like the driver was dead because he couldn't get out. In fact, Tianlei was much smarter than that. He made sure to buy some time and hide behind a tree while the zombies dismantled the van. Suddenly, a hand came through the bush. It was no good, so he swung his axe to separate it from its owner. But Wu Bing realized in time and shouted to him that it was him and not the zombie. He was very scared, and his friend was also understandable in this case. When they realized it, Wu Bing just fell to his knees. They were both scared to death, one thinking he was about to be killed by a zombie, and the other losing his arm. Wu Bin said that the head teacher had taken all their classmates to the library. He was very grateful for helping them escape and considered him a hero. But he started to be modest, saying that he was no hero because he was afraid of death himself. In fact, he was very embarrassed to be praised like that. He broke into a sweat when he thought of her again. He asked Wu Bing if he had seen Shen Xinya, and it was important for him to know that she was okay. His friend madly hated to upset him, but he told the truth that there were too many people on stage, there was anxiety, and he couldn't find it. Xiao Tianlei wasn't very happy to hear that she had an assistant and a bodyguard to protect her, and she would be fine. He didn't really believe it. The library was the best refuge for the survivors. Tianlei said that they should go there and meet their classmates. While the zombies were distracted by the lifeless bodies, they almost managed to run behind them unnoticed. What they had feared had happened. Wu Bing tripped on a step while climbing the stairs, and this noise just couldn't help but attract the attention of the zombies. They ran as fast as they could away from them. The guys nervously started pounding on the door because it was closed and a crowd of zombies was coming up behind them. The classmates didn't want to open the door so they wouldn't bring them in. Then Wu Bing couldn't stand it any longer and switched to a high-pitched tone. He told them that they were the ones who had come, and if they didn't want to die at the hands of the monsters, they had better act quickly. The head teacher heard their names and rushed to the door, ordering her classmates to open the door immediately. She remembered who had helped them by distracting the zombies. But a guy from their class stopped her by grabbing her arm. He ran at her saying that it was risky, and they would bring zombies to them. She felt insanely resentful for those who were standing outside their door and couldn't enter. She started yelling at Chen Hao, condemning him for wanting to leave their saviors to die. Wu Bing was already hysterical because the monsters had only 7 steps to go, and they would catch up with them. They were just begging to be let into the library. In the end, the head elder decided to take matters into her own hands, and pushing Chen Hao in the chest, she headed towards the door with a confident stride. It was hard for her to hear the shouting, but the classmate stopped her again, hitting her cheek with all his might. She staggered from the blow, not expecting any of the boys to be able to do such a thing. The classmates standing aside were very surprised and opened their mouths. They immediately began to condemn him for overstepping his boundaries, even though they were a team. He was incredibly angry because he started yelling at them, claiming that there were zombies behind the door, and if he opened the door to his classmates, they would all die. Meanwhile, the head elder stood holding her sore spot and looking at the others for their reactions. Everyone was frightened and agreed with Chen Hao's opinion. She turned to him and turned to insults. She was so furious that she wasn't ready to accept that they would let someone die in front of them. He pushed her again, saying that she was stupid for not realizing that they would die if the door was opened. He told her to die herself, but not to risk the others. Wu Bing, who was outside the door, was well aware of everything, so he threatened Chen Hao that as soon as he entered the room, he would immediately send the bully to the next world. Xiao Tianlei was already tired of this negotiation through the door while he was fighting off the zombies. He said that they urgently needed to stop arguing with them and get out of there. But Wu was adamant about leaving everything behind. He didn't know where to go, if not to the library. Fear and terror seized him, so confused was he. There was no time to discuss the plan. The monsters were advancing, and they needed to act quickly. Therefore, Tianlei told him to follow him. Wu Bin was ashamed of his friend for continuing to talk to them without paying attention to the zombies, because he almost ate them. But the latter hurriedly consoled him, saying that it was not his fault. Even if they were under different circumstances without the zombies, Chen Hao still wouldn't open up to them. He explained to him that it was human nature. Chen Hao had hated everyone before he was despised, and now his whole nature had come out. He also added that he understood him perfectly well, as he had been the object of abuse for a long time. He did not want to condemn him because it was natural. Looking at his hand, he noted that he would not let it go, if only because he had dared to hit the headman. He promised to pay him back double for it. They were looking at the library door when Wu Bing wondered what they would do if they couldn't get in, because the door was locked from the inside. Xiao Tianlei was much smarter because he came up with a plan to climb through the open window and open the emergency door of the college. That's what he did. In the library, the guys sat there not knowing what to do afterwards, because leaving the building would be a very risky move, even though they were very bored to be there. A classmate sat beside the head teacher trying to calm her down. She stroked her cheek, always asking if it hurt. She felt so sorry for her. The girl turned to Chen Hao, reminding him that Tianlei and Wu Bing had saved their lives, and instead of thanking him, he couldn't even open the door for them. The headman was incredibly hurt, not from the blow, but from the reaction of his classmates, who didn't even stand up for them as they continued to watch him act defiantly. And Chen Hao was infuriated by Yi Sitong's behavior, who only started to resent it now instead of taking charge herself and distracting the zombies. She didn't care about his remarks since he had done something far worse than she had. Seaton insisted that he apologize to the head girl. He decided that they didn't understand what was going on around them. Chen Hao told them to shut up and not to make him angry, or he might not be able to hold back and beat them up. Before he could react to the angry grin of his classmates, his name was suddenly heard behind him. He turned around in fear, not realizing who wanted him and what he wanted. It was Xiao Tianlei, who did not hesitate to immediately hit him hard on the face. He didn't want to tolerate this and forgive him for his attitude towards girls. After he flew backwards and fell to the floor, he pulled himself up and with a face expressing utter displeasure, asked him how he had gotten into their library. But Wu Bin had other plans, and he came at the guy, grabbing him by the collar and yelling that he almost killed them, and they could have been zombie food. Finally, Chen Hao began to realize something. Now he was no longer cocky and confident. His face expressed fear. He explained that he wanted to protect their classmates. He stood up and pushed him away, saying that if they opened the door, the zombies would come in and kill everyone. He needed to do this for the others. Even Tianlei already agreed with him. The rest of the classmates also agreed that they needed a hiding place, and since they had entered, there was no need to make a fuss about it. However, Wu Bing was still dissatisfied even though they were all already in a safe place. He didn't like the fact that he was using his classmates to escape. Xiao Tianlei stood in front of Chen Hao again. He stood silently for a few seconds, but as soon as he wanted to ask what he wanted, he punched him. Chen Hao was infinitely angered by this. He felt that he was untouchable and that no one could raise a hand against him because he wanted the best for everyone. To shut him up, they hit him again. Xiao Tianlei warned him that if he dared to touch the headman again, they would feed his body to the zombies. Leaving him in utter bewilderment after these words, he grabbed the head girl by the arm and told her to go along with them away from such classmates. Watching their receding figures, Chen Hao holding his cheeks, noted that he would not get away with this and would not just let it go and take revenge. They just went to another room and sat on the floor. Tianlei was wiping his axe clean of blood without paying attention to them. Meanwhile, the headmistress looked at him with loving eyes without averting her gaze. She blushed so much, especially after he held her hand. Then she returned to the thoughts that had been eating away at her. She began to cry, realizing that she had failed to open the doors for them without hurting them. Wu Bing was angered that she was upset for this reason. He knew it wasn't her fault, but he blamed it on Chen Hao, who was afraid of getting killed. Lowering her head down and not wanting to look them in the eye, she admitted that she didn't think she was worthy of the title of headman because she couldn't protect them. In order for her not to be so sad, Tianlei decided to add that she would remain the best head elder in his heart anyway. Wu Bing supported him. To their surprise, she burst into tears instead of being happy at such nice words. They couldn't understand why she was reacting in such a way. As it turned out, what they said and her tears had nothing to do with it. She was just scared, not realizing at what point the zombies might attack them. Tianlei put his arm around her shoulders and warned her that he would protect her to the very end. As long as he lived, no one would dare to hurt her. She looked at him with such admiration that she had never paid attention to him before. But now, she saw him as a real man. She also decided to point out that with the arrival of the zombie apocalypse, they had essentially lost their class, and since she was no longer a senior, she asked to be called Si Tong. Xiao Tianlei was primarily concerned about whether she had seen Shen Xinyu. She had heard about his love for her before, but now all the speculations were confirmed. And since she herself cared for him, she decided that a good man like him should be consoled. She told him that she saw a girl in the square. After the zombies appeared, she and her assistant ran away. She then asked them for a phone number to contact her parents to find out if he was all right. She could not reach them. Then they shared with her that their phones also had no signal. The outbreak occurred not only near their school, but all over the world the connection was blocked. When she heard that, she started to get hysterical again, because she was very worried about her family. She couldn't even find out if they were still alive, or if the zombies had gotten to them. Zhao Tianlei couldn't look at her in such a state, so he decided to reassure her that they were just as well hidden in the shelter as they were. Meanwhile, their classmates were getting very sad. The blue-haired girl told her friend Xiao Hao that she was very hungry. They all have nothing to eat. The others were outraged at such selfishness, adding that the couple only cared about food, and if they were so hungry, they could have gone out and gotten food. Xiao Hao didn't tolerate such insolence, saying that they didn't ask him for food, but only shared that they were feeling hungry after sitting in the library for so long. It was a familiar feeling for the others, as they too were struggling to keep up, and the whining of the others was just a painful reminder to them. The guys were looking at a few classmates who had piled up and were starting to squabble. They couldn't understand what was going on. It was hard for Si Tong to just look at all of this from the outside. She concluded that they were all not united and needed help. But Tianlei stopped her by grabbing her arm. He reminded her that Qian Hao had hit her not too long ago. He said that no matter what she did, she would be blamed for everything. Observing their conflict, he asked her the perfectly logical question of what she would do if they asked her to solve the problem of lack of food. Xiao Hao grabbed the cooler and realized that there wasn't even a drop of water in there. The classmates started smashing everything around in search of some food. Then his girlfriend suggested that he go to the second floor to the principal's office, assuming that he would have food there. They all discussed it together and decided to send Xiao Hao there since there was nothing to lose without food. They wouldn't be able to last long in the library. Almost going upstairs, he ran into Lin Mu's company. They were not ready to let him enter the office, as they had already taken a seat there themselves. Lin Mu decided to still inquire about what their plan was and what they were going to do next, for why he was even going in that direction in the first place. Wu Bing was very surprised to see the major there. He didn't understand what they were doing in that place, and they didn't let their classmates pass through. Xiao Hao was very scared when he discovered them. The others also started to panic, as they had heard that Lin Mu and his friends were very bad. All the confidence with which he had started his journey evaporated. He hunched over, sweating profusely, and squeezed out the words that they were going to look for food. Lin Mu did not hesitate to put the book he was reading on the table and walked toward Xiao Hao. In one confident movement, he pushed him backwards. Everyone was shocked when they saw him flying down the stairs. The girl couldn't hide her emotions, feeling horrified at what had happened. He tumbled down the stairs. It was so humiliating that as he fell, he wondered what the rest of his classmates would think of him. The girl immediately ran over to him to see if he was all right. Lin Mu practically followed them down to the first floor. He thought they were all a group of nerds who knew nothing about the world and dared to think. He marked the stairs as his boundary and the second floor as his territory. And if any of them dared to cross his line, he'd send them to the afterlife. And regarding their question, he noted that there is indeed plenty of food upstairs, but he is only willing to give it to them in exchange for some valuable items. Wu Bing just couldn't hold on any longer, so he was so annoyed by Lin Mu. He was too arrogant and had taken over a whole floor full of food for himself. Lin Mu turned his attention to the Xiao Hao girl. He suggested that she leave this trash and go upstairs with him instead of getting killed. His words made her furious, so she slapped him on the hand he was holding the sandwich in. She wasn't ready to leave anyone here. Such insolence made him so angry that he slapped her across the face with all his might. He wasn't going to stand for their insolence and rudeness either. When he had already grabbed her hair, Sitong decided to stand up for her, telling him to let go of his classmate and stop lashing out at them. She decided to shame him and remind him that there is a mess going on outside and they need to be more united and not bully their classmates at a time like this. The others proudly supported her words. She also added that the library is not their property, so the food in it is not shared. Lin Mu switched to her with his teeth bared. He was very annoyed, saying that she was always in his way, and the teachers protecting her were already in the other world. He always knew that she liked to be the center of attention, so he told his guys to take off her clothes, thus showing everyone what a slender body she had. The Major's nasty friends immediately moved on her, discussing who would be the first and what they would pull off her. She was very frightened at the sight of those who were coming towards her, but fortunately, she had her own protector. Tianlei took an axe in his hands and blocked her with it. He asked them to stop. This request made Lin Mu laugh. He decided that he had no right to tell him what to do, and that he had not had enough of yesterday, and was willing to die here. Tianlei responded by telling him that he could bully him until that day, but things had changed. Lin's era had passed, and now he couldn't do whatever he wanted. He hit the cabinet with his axe, and it just shattered into splinters, all the objects flying out of it. So he showed he was ready to fight him. Lin Mu's face expressed dissatisfaction, and even so, a drop of sweat still ran down his face. He was clearly nervous, because he was only strong in words. His company immediately decided to backstab him, saying his axe was very sharp and he was crazy. They weren't ready to go up against a man like that. But he took over again, and once again, before going up, reminded them that the second floor belonged to them, and only they had water. Gathering back together and approaching the stairs, he repeated that if anyone decided to go up, he should not be blamed for their deaths, because he had warned them. When they were already on the second floor, he turned to one of his aides telling him to look for weapons, and if anyone came up, they were finished. Suddenly, Sitong started to faint. Wu Bin held her down so she wouldn't fall. They thought she was frightened by the Major, which made her feel sick. In fact, she just didn't expect people to be so cruel. Just a few hours ago they were friends, and now everything had changed. Tianlei explained to her that everyone could live in peace and harmony, but as soon as their lives were threatened, they would sacrifice others for themselves. He asked her to pull herself together and try to change her character train of thought, or else she would definitely get into trouble and be in danger. Wu Bing, however, decided to soften his speech by adding that he and Tianlei would still always be by her side and save her. She was very grateful to them for everything. Looking at her sick classmates, Sitong reminded them that Lin Mu had all the food and water, and they would starve to death if they stayed in the library and did nothing. Tianlei understood this very well, but there were too many Lin Mu people around that they could not confront now, because this was not the time for conflict. He got up and headed for the door, telling them that the two of them were probably hungry too, so he suggested they go get something to eat. They opened their mouths and were very surprised that they could eat somewhere. They were all hungry and had no idea where he had called them. Meanwhile, his dear Xinyu was sitting in a small company and was just as broken. It was very hard for her to cope with all the stress she had endured. The girl sitting next to her noticed that she was sad, so she decided to ask if she was okay or if something had happened. Xinyu didn't share anything, so she said that everything was fine and nothing had happened at her place. She was still smiling sweetly, which was really believable. Meanwhile, the boys were walking down the corridor. Wu Bing couldn't understand where Tianlei was leading them to. He doubted that there was food in this place. With a sly smile, he turned to them, saying that she could be taken to the cafeteria, and all they had to do was help him unlock the door and wait for his return. When they heard that, they were very surprised, because they didn't expect him to leave the building knowing that there were hundreds of zombies waiting for him outside. They certainly didn't want that. Sitong tried her best to talk him out of it, saying that she wasn't very hungry and was willing to endure it as long as he didn't go out. He smiled sweetly at all her entreaties. He knew what he had to do, so he asked them not to worry about him. He ran out the door, and they were left to stare after him. They were so broken because they were so afraid of losing their hero over some food. But after 30 seconds of silence, Wu Bing came to his senses and realized that this was not the way to go. He was sure that his friend would return to them unharmed. The whole area near the school was filled with roaming zombies that walked in circles looking for prey. He managed to sneak past unnoticed. He looked into the alley and found 2 lifeless bodies with food bags lying around, and one of them had a full backpack. He ran over to them and rummaged through the chest for food, and there was plenty. He started up the vault to put all the supplies in it. He looked at what he had and realized that these products would last him a long time, but for 3 people, they are very little enough for a few days at most. It was clear that the more time passed, the harder it was to find food. He put the crackers in the storage room because they could be kept longer. It was also necessary to divide the water. While he was distributing the food, someone was actively watching him from the sidelines, but it was expected at this point. He heard some nasty noises, like growling but drawn out. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. The long-haired monster opened its jaws and came at him. At first, Tianlei stretched out his arm in front of him automatically. It was obvious that against a zombie, you should use something worse. Instantly, he managed to grab his axe and strike the zombie right on the head. He had to do it as fast as he could and run, because at the zombie's shout and the axe blow, other hungry people came running to find food. They surrounded him from all sides, preventing him from leaving the alley. But luckily, there was a window right next to him, and he opened it and dived in. The zombies didn't have time to grab him, so he was unharmed. He was lucky and found himself in the kitchen. It was a good opportunity to grab some more food, so he rushed to the refrigerator and found rice porridge. Meanwhile, the guys were in a state of confusion. Sitong walked nervously from side to side, while Wu Bing sat there shaking his legs, not knowing what to do. Suddenly, they heard a knock on the door. It was Zhao Tianlei who asked them to open it for him. Wu Bing was delighted that his friend had managed to return. Sitong was also not far behind, and she silently hugged him. Tears welled up in her eyes, as she had already gotten herself worked up enough. Seeing Tianlei's surprised reaction, Wu Bing added that she was very worried about him, and if he didn't come back, he wouldn't be able to stop her. He even felt a little funny about it. He had never felt such concern only from Wu Bing, so he said that it was better to let him worry. He didn't hesitate and immediately shared what he had brought them, opening a backpack filled with food. They were very surprised as they had not expected such a gift. They were wildly excited when they saw a whole pot full of rice. None of them could have dreamed of such a thing, thanks to Tianlei. He asked them not to be shy and to eat. They all knew they were hungry, so they began to eat the porridge with both cheeks. Sitong was happy to finally touch hot food at such a time. Wu Bing had forgotten the taste of rice, so he couldn't get enough of its flavor. Noticing that Tianlei was just sitting silently and watching them eat the food brought to them, Sitong decided to ask why he wasn't eating with them. He confessed to them, so they wouldn't feel as if they weren't sharing with him that he had already eaten in the dining room because he wasn't hungry. Tianlei said that the zombies outside had become more dangerous, and food would become more difficult to get every day, so it would be necessary to appreciate it and drink water more often. He also added that they will have to hide the fact that they have food from other classmates, or they will try to attack them because of hunger. It was hard for Sitong to hear this since she also had friends among them, and depriving them of products was tantamount to taking their lives. She was not so cruel. Wu Bing didn't really appreciate her gesture of kindness. He didn't feel like helping those who were willing to leave them to die by feeding them to evil zombies. So people. He explained to her that Tianlei had risked his life to get them food, and when they needed it too, no one cared about them. Then she admitted that Wu Bing was right after all, so she promised them that she wouldn't tell anyone that they had food, not even her close classmates. They looked at the almost full pot of rice and thought about what to do with it. Wu Bin suggested hiding it, but he didn't know where to put it. But Zhao Tianlei didn't bother and walked out the door. They didn't really appreciate his gesture, just didn't understand why he was doing it, since it was so dangerous to go out there. The boys stared at him with their mouths open, sweat running down their faces. They were very worried about him, and it was unclear what he wanted to do. He just put a pot of rice porridge outside the college entrance. It was the safest place he could think of. When he walked back in and closed the door, Wu Bing decided to cheer him up by thanking him for his work, since he had done so much for them. He added that the other people who saw the zombies attack won't open the door to ruin someone and find food, so no one will find their dinner. Tianlei decided to hurry them up by saying that their absence might arouse the suspicion of their classmates. In order to avoid being seen, they had to go back. They tried to go in as if nothing had happened, but they were very surprised that the room was so noisy. The classmates just played music with their ears covered. Lin Mu came down to them and asked why they were so noisy and if they were hungry. He said that they were his classmates, so they could go to him. Sitong was angry to see him trying to deceive people by pretending to be kind, but Tianlei said they shouldn't interfere as long as he didn't touch them. Then Lin Mu drew everyone's attention to the fact that Shen Xinyu was sitting there. He at least thought that the beauty was in the library with her girlfriend. Zhou Tianlei was very much surprised, as he hadn't been able to find her for a long time. He was so worried about her that she hadn't managed to escape or was trapped. And of course, Lin Mu was not confused and approached her asking why she didn't come to him, knowing that he had food and water and he wouldn't let anyone hurt her. Wu Bin was shocked, reminding his friend that his goddess had been in the library all this time, but they just hadn't noticed her. Sitong was really upset when she heard that. Even though she knew that Xinyu liked him, she was uncomfortable to realize that she already liked him so much. Her girlfriend replied to Lin Mu about how Xinyu really hadn't eaten in a long time, and they would really appreciate it if he shared food and water with them. He immediately signaled his assistant to prepare food for the class goddess and her friend. He did so without fail. His friend handed his girlfriend a bottle of water and a sandwich. She smiled at him and thanked him for treating them so well. Lin Mu leaned toward her, warning her that the first floor was crowded and noisy, and as a girl, she could be harmed. He invited her to the second floor to protect her. She also thanked him for singling them out, but she still refused. She didn't want to stand out and leave the first floor with her classmates. He took her hand, insisting that she come with him, but Xinya jumped up trying to fight back and begging him to let her go. The girlfriend reminded him of his promise. Zhou Tianlei was also struggling not to go over and kick him for daring to touch her. His teeth were already gritting, but he didn't want to attract attention. Lin Mu instantly shut her friend up, saying that he wasn't talking to her. He warned her that if she ever interfered again, he would beat her up. Shen Xinyu could not stand such insolence. She could not allow anyone to insult her friend, much less threaten her. She slapped his face with all her might. In addition, she shouted that she wouldn't obey anyone, even if they gave her even a little food. Shen Xinyu is not a corrupt woman who would do anything for food. She, in turn, threw the water and food back to his assistant. They didn't need anything from those scoundrels who thought they were owed everything. Lin Mu was furious, but he didn't respond to her in any way. He only said that he would wait a few days until she started begging for food on her knees. Her friend immediately went to Xinyu to see how she was feeling. She was very worried about her, and they hadn't been able to get food to eat. After a moment of silence, she answered her that in times like these, they should not rely on anyone and trust only they had each other and no one else. Wu Bing was still in shock after seeing this. He thought they would find a way to defend themselves. A pretty girl like her shouldn't think about trash like Lin Mu. Tianlei pointed out that not all stars act according to unspoken rules. Most of them come to fight for their lives on their own. Sitong cut into their conversation, saying that no matter how much they helped her this time, she was just lucky. She was in great danger here anyway. So he was just wondering if she would agree to go upstairs, and if so, he would despise her. But thanks to this situation, his opinion has changed. She shared with him that girls are most vulnerable at times like this, so he had a chance. If he came to comfort her, he could touch her heart. Tianlei pointed out that she was a famous star, and he was a poor student who had the right to think whatever he wanted, stalling for time as much as he could to justify himself. And then Wu Bing couldn't stand it anymore, and started pushing him towards the beauty, saying that whatever he says is unimportant, you have to go and act while you have a chance. There he was, right in front of the ladies. He immediately broke into a sweat because he didn't know what to say, and they stared at him as if he were some kind of fool. He was very embarrassed. He didn't know how to start a dialogue, so he stammered and asked them if they were all right after the situation that had happened. Sister Hua immediately stood up for her, saying that she was tired and needed to rest. If he was worried about her, the best thing to do was not to disturb her. He decided to get straight to the point so as not to scare them off. He took out his backpack and warned them that he had brought some food and water for them to drink. Hua immediately shrieked with joy to find that he had groceries. However, he asked her to be quiet and not to attract the attention of the others. He handed them some sandwiches and bottles of water. He wanted to make them feel as good as he could and make them feel comfortable enough to trust him. Tianlei asked her not to think about him or that guy, but to silently accept help from him. After all, they didn't need to do anything but take the food. He also asked them to remember to keep it for the future, and also not to tell anyone that they had it, so as not to cause conflicts. Hua immediately grabbed the sandwich, and Xinyu just stared at him, not understanding why he decided to treat her so well without asking for anything in return. Qianhao, meanwhile, decided to accept Lin Mu's offer and went up to the second floor. He wanted to talk to the major and take a chance. But he wasn't really happy to see him. He didn't really care about any of them. He sat sideways and asked what he wanted without changing his position. Qianhao decided to remind him that they had always had a good relationship, and especially at a time like this, he couldn't do wrong to him and leave his brother to die. He asked him to let him follow him. He added that any request he made he was ready to fulfill, even to jump into the fire if necessary. He and his assistants did not like the offer. He said that he already had people, but asked for a reason why they should take him. Hearing his aide's words, that they could not force Xinyu to come up to him, Qianhao promised to fulfill his wish and bring her to him. During the small dinner, Hua decided to check with Xinyu about the reason why Tianlei helped her, and helped her with the food. What was the relationship between them? But she didn't understand what the question was about because she didn't know it at all, and she didn't want to get into why they suddenly decided to help her. So she answered her and said she didn't know the reason. But Hua didn't give up and kept thinking about why, with such a shortage, he had shared the food with them. Her manager shared that despite who she is, she still treats her like a sister and does everything for her good. But she never once thought badly of her. She noted that everything was fine, and she understood. She never once thought her opinion was wrong. Glancing at her classmates, she added that the situation showed that zombies are scary and dangerous, but humans are even worse. And pretty girls like her are in danger. She really wanted to save her and protect her, and in her opinion, the best way was to find someone they could rely on. Hugging her knees and lowering her head, Xinyu said that she understood her, but she couldn't and wouldn't sell her body for their safety. Hua immediately realized that she had misunderstood her words, but she was not referring to Lin Mu. But Xinyu had no idea who she was referring to. Toya wondered what opinion she had formed about Zhao Tianlei, whether he seemed good or whether she was not willing to trust this person. Xinyu glanced at his dejected face as he moved around the library. She looked at him and realized she was embarrassed, so she hid her face. And then Tianlei approached his friends. Wu Bing noticed that he was behaving strangely, so he asked why he was so unhappy, even though he knew the answer. And when he hesitated, Wu Bin himself answered his own question that he was sad because of his own fault, because he had always been very stupid when it came to his relationships. Also, Wu Bing didn't forget to mention that the headman was very upset when he went to Xinyu's place. She was so embarrassed after saying that she started to deny it. As if for the stupid, he rephrased and said again that she was jealous of him. She, of course, started to retort, but Tianlei didn't care about that. And while the boys were fooling around in the background, they all turned around and heard a strange sound. Each classmate turned his attention to the source of the noise. When Tianlei ran out to find out why everyone was so horrified, he was shocked. It was impossible to look at this picture calmly because someone had fallen. A girl fell from a great height. Instant death. There was a reason for this, because it was the same girl that Qian Hao kidnapped not long ago. Everyone around him was discussing that they had seen him with 2 girls upstairs. Everyone thought Lin Mu was a monster who was even capable of such a low deed. And he didn't feel the slightest regret because everyone would die soon anyway. Qian Hao called her a bug and promised to bring the boss a couple more. Zhao Tianlei couldn't contain himself and was about to move towards them when Wu Bing stopped him by reminding him that he had a lot of people. He advised him not to be so impulsive, and from his own words, they should not confront them and attract their attention until they themselves are hooked. Then Tianlei defiantly took off his shirt and covered the upper part of the dead girl's body with it. He said the very words that he usually said. But still through his teeth, he said that he would avenge her, and those who had done this to her would be punished in the future. Lin Mu was simply enraged. At these words, he did not understand how he dared to curse him, especially in the presence of the rest of his classmates. The people had already, meanwhile, revolted and decided to go and beat up Lin Mu, because such actions are simply unforgivable and deserve to be hurt back. His aides said it was playing with fire. Usually people were afraid of him because of his powerful father, but now that their lives are at stake, they don't care about anything. Lin Mu turned his attention to Tianlei, threatening him that he should remember him because one night he would make him beg for mercy on his knees. But they didn't care about anything he said. They mentally imagined killing him so that he would stop bullying people. When night fell and everyone was sleeping, Zhao Tianlei suddenly woke up. He heard a familiar sound that he had heard before from the zombies. He glanced across the street and saw shadows on the windows. They were zombies who were actively breaking into the college, sensing that someone was hiding there. As the growling intensified, the others jumped up as well. Everyone immediately panicked, pressuring the men and telling them that they had a duty to protect them all. Tianlei decided to take matters into his own hands and shut them up. He ordered them to reinforce the door and keep the zombies from breaking in. The guys moved the closet, the girls moved the chairs. They all rushed to the bookcases to block the passage. They had to act fast, because time was running out, and they might not make it. And so, when they pulled the next cabinet over, Tianlei noticed that it was broken. But that wasn't even the biggest problem as it turned out. He remembered that the back door of the building was open, and it was possible that the zombies had come from there. They rushed to close it. Suddenly, they heard cries for help and turned around to find that the lifeless body of a girl had come to life and started throwing herself at the others. She was so horrible and frightening. His jacket immediately fell off her body. The bottomless eyes, the strange gait, all said that she had turned into a zombie. Sitong couldn't believe her eyes, and neither could the others, because she thought she had crashed to death and wondered how she had become a monster. Wu Bing had explained to her based on the movies she'd seen that a person doesn't become a zombie immediately after being bitten. She could have been bitten from the outside, but she only became a zombie now. Everyone immediately rushed away, but one guy was confused and didn't react immediately when a zombie grabbed his leg and dropped him. He was begging for help. And it came. Zhao Tianlei used his axe to rush at the zombie, hitting it on the head. But he realized that it wouldn't help them restrain the others. A crowd of zombies broke into the library, and they didn't have time to block their way. The only thing left to do was to run for their lives, because there were too many of them. Everyone started warning each other, saying that the monsters had gotten in through the back door. We had to find another safe place. Tianlei shouted to Wu Bing to protect Sitong, while he had to take care of protecting the others, trying to urgently come up with a new plan of action. When he looked back, he found that the zombies had already caught up with the people, and some of them had already fallen. The situation was as dire and desperate as possible. Everyone rushed to run up the stairs, and panic gripped everyone. Tianlei asked them not to push and to take their turn, but it was very difficult. No one listened to him, because absolutely everyone was afraid to die at the hands of zombies. Everyone thought only of himself, pushing the one in front and trampling him. Eventually, they oriented themselves on the second floor. They made the decision to head to the curator's office, which was directly ahead of theirs where it was closed. The door was actually being held open by Lin Mu's aides, who had put a cabinet there and were pressing on it. They weren't going to let anyone in and rescue them. Lin Mu made it clear to them that if they didn't want to be eaten by zombies, they should get away from this office, as they wouldn't let them in anyway. Among the frenzied crowd was Jinyu, who called out to Sister Hua for help. It was hard for her to stay on her feet in the crowd, as she was being pressed from all sides. Then Tianlei appeared and grabbed her wrist and told her to follow him to escape. He knew that Hua was also looking for her, but he had no choice. He explained to her that there would be no escape upstairs, where death awaited everyone, and he could take her to the safest place if she trusted him. Wu Bing stood with Sitong and waved his arms for them to see him, because he had found a way to escape from the college. They all headed up there together, hoping they wouldn't run into any zombies. There's a good chance that most of them went upstairs to get the humans. But what a disappointment it was when Tianlei opened the door and they found themselves in the men's restroom instead of outside. Hua was very angry at Wu Bing for misleading them. She was amazed that he was in the school and didn't know where the exit was. But he hadn't been there for a year. Sitong looked back and realized there was no turning back. Hua began to sob at how stupid her death would be, especially in the men's room. But salvation did come when they saw Tianlei, who had already run off to reconnoiter and shared that almost all the zombies were in the library and there weren't many outside. He asked Wu Bing to climb on his shoulders and see what was going on outside through the window. They had to assess the situation before climbing out. He happily informed them that there were no zombies outside, but there was a car in the playground. He climbed out the window. Tianlei called the girls over to him and told them to climb next and he would climb last. Wu Bing would also help them land. Sitong immediately noted that she wanted to go third. Whether out of fear or other considerations, it didn't matter in which order. Shinya was the next to come out. He was very grateful to him for his help, because she had never expected that there was such a good man among them. He put her on his shoulders and immediately looked away since she was wearing a dress. Hua noticed it too and asked him not to look up. Then Hua climbed up and was safely caught by the boys. We had to wait for the others to climb over, and then we could go on our way. It was Sitong's turn, but she hesitated. It was important for her to know what he would do after they all went outside. She was afraid he'd stay here. He asked her not to worry as he had his own plan. He held out his hand to help her climb in, but she wasn't ready until she knew what the plan was. He couldn't stand it any longer and grabbed her hand forcibly, as there wasn't much time left. She didn't want to leave for fear that she wouldn't be able to help her classmates. But he was tired of it all, so he decided to open her eyes and tell her that they were just using her. But she didn't believe she could handle them alone. He shouted at her, saying that if he was capable of handling them alone, she would be a burden to him. He didn't think he was so useless. Tears were streaming down her cheek, and she couldn't hold back her emotions. She agreed to leave, but before she did, she had something very important to tell him. She squeezed her eyes shut and kissed him on the cheek, confessing her love for him. Afterwards, she asked him to promise her that they would all survive, to which he gave his promise. Then he took her to the window and noticed that they had to hurry because the zombies were coming, and he needed to distract them to escape. The zombies were already peering through the cracks trying to get in. The door was completely failing, and he had to stop them before it was too late. He held the door with all his might, but the zombies' hands were still reaching through the cracks, almost reaching his face. He struggled to hold on. Watching this, Sitong, who was sitting on the window, burst into tears, especially after his desperate "go away." She felt particularly hurt. She had no other choice. Tianlei shouted out the window to Wu Bin not to wait for him, and he took the girls out of the school to any safe place. He promised to find them later. Wu Bing was as delighted as ever at his friend's heroism, and asked him to be more careful. Sitong reminded him that he had to keep his promise. Shouting to him that he must save himself and return to them, the guys rushed to the car before the zombies showed up there. And then the monsters came out so far that they could grab his face by the hair. Then he realized that no, he would not be able to keep his word to Sitong. He ran away from the door, realizing he wasn't ready to die in this place. The zombies hadn't expected this, so they all fell on top of each other. As they gathered, Tianlei was already waiting for them standing with an axe in his hands. He was ready to take their attack and finish off the uncleanness in this room. Meanwhile, the others were already in the car trying to start it nervously. The main thing was to get there before the zombies ran out of the school and noticed them. But Si Tong stopped him, saying that they had to wait for Tianlei because they couldn't just leave him here after all he had done for them. Hoa didn't appreciate her kindness, saying that they too had to escape as there was no time to wait. She was sure that the zombies would be here any minute. She explained that the library was already crawling with them and they were about to break out, and if they waited, there was a good chance they would be eaten by zombies. And then she added that Tianlei might have already gone to the other world, they just couldn't know about it. Jinyu didn't like her theory and pessimism. Wu Bin admitted that although he doesn't show it, he's also worried about his friend, but he promised him to take them away from school to a safe place. It was a chance. Suddenly, Si Tong jumped off her seat saying that they could go without her and she would just go back to Tianlei. Wu Bing grabbed her arm. He reminded her that he had asked him to protect her at all costs and he couldn't break his promise and let her die in vain. When he talked about how Tianlei had some kind of plan and that they had to believe in it for him to come back, tears came to her eyes. He was right. However, she couldn't imagine how he could handle so many zombies alone, but he insisted on believing. This was the Tianlei they all knew, who would never give up for nothing. He always had plans in place that saved them more than once. Although tearful, Si Tong got back into the car. They all looked at each other and made a unanimous decision to move on to safety. The entire men's restroom is covered in blood, with several dozen lifeless zombie bodies. It's raining outside, and Tianlei is walking through the playground with his bloody axe. He was so tired and exhausted, he didn't even have the strength to lift his legs, so he couldn't stand it and fell to the ground. And then his ring began to warn him of danger because some parts of his body were infected. And if he used the liquid, he would become a zombie. Barely as he rolled over from his stomach to his back and spread his arms, he remembered that he did have an evolutionary fluid that could save him. He looked at the flask and wondered if it would work. It contained a virus, not immunity, and he was worried that he might turn into a monster after the injection. And after thinking about it all, he came to the conclusion that he simply had no other choice but to make things worse. He had to get on with it. He pushed it in, but felt nothing. He thought it hadn't worked and it was too late, but then his eyes started to redden and sting. He crouched, feeling the incredible pain as his veins swelled and began to bulge. It felt like his body was about to tear apart from the inside out. After a little while, the rain ended and the sun came out. But Tianlei was still lying motionless on his back, with his arms spread out to the sides. Alive. He stood up and examined himself, finding that there was no mutation and his body was free of any damage. Then he realized that the ring had not deceived him. Then the ring got into his reasoning and asked him to call it a virtual god, and he in turn apologized for doubting him. Suddenly, the virtual OG informed him that his level had increased from 0 to 2, and with it, his strength, dexterity, defense, and so on. He was very happy because the promotion meant that his strength had increased. He felt stronger than before, and now he had more strength. He told him of 19 classes of evolution, from soldier to martial, from bottom to top. There were many subclasses beyond that. A huge flood of information was pouring out at him, and he was having a hard time making sense of it. He was very angry to find out that he was on the penultimate level. Because he killed a large number of zombies, he was promoted to private. God added that for each zombie, you get 1 point, but you need 150. The system told him that the hope of mankind was in his hands. Then the ring went back to sleep. It pissed him off because he had no time to ask anything again. But he had made some points to himself, in particular that after evolution, he became stronger. He needed to put this theory to the test, and then he saw a giant-sized statue. Without thinking, he hit it with all his might so that it shattered into several hundred pieces. He looked at his hands and was amazed that he was second grade and already had such incredible strength. Tianlei was sure that Wu Bing would be happy for him. The zombies had left the library, so he went to the school to see if there were any survivors and generally assessed the situation. The first floor was a wreck. On the other hand, the curator's office was as calm as if no one was there. Obviously, Lin Mu and his assistants had managed to escape somewhere. He was pleased to find a shower. After taking it, he plopped down on the couch. TV had reported on the virus outbreak yesterday and that more than half the residents were infected. The inhabitants have hope for survival when the news appeared that they have created special bases for the survivors. The rest need to hide and wait for help. Suddenly, the silence was interrupted by a strange sound, like someone breaking into the cabin. It was clearly coming from the cabinet. Tianlei immediately grabbed his axe. And just as he opened the closet about to end the source of the noise, the girl inside screamed. She was begging the zombie not to eat her. Even though he was scared out of his mind, he tried to reassure her that he was a human being, not a zombie. He needed her to open her eyes and see for herself. When she finally looked at him, she was relieved. He kept telling her that he was not a bad man and would never hurt her. Then she began to sob, cradling her crying face in her palms. Tianlei didn't interfere in any way. He just assumed that she was in great shock. After calming down, she shared that her name was Cheng Yao from the art department. Yesterday, she went to the library with a friend, not expecting a flashback. At this time, they hid in the corridor, hungry. Later, Qian Hao came to them and invited them to join Lin Mu. He was her older brother, so they trusted him. She didn't expect that when they went up to the second floor they would run into Lin Mu, who would start to intimidate them. Soon her friend couldn't bear it and jumped down. She also added that when the zombies broke into the library, she and Lin Mu hid in this office. When they left, they went down the curtain and broke it. Since there was no way for her to get down other than jumping from the window, she got scared and decided to just hide in the closet waiting for help. Tianlei was very angry when he heard this story. He was especially angry that those cowards didn't just run away, leaving the girl alone to die. When she heard his name, she was truly surprised because she had heard of him as the person who had hit Qian Hao and was going to teach Lin Mu a lesson. She was wildly delighted that in front of her sat a man who dared to fight back against bullies. As long as everyone was afraid of Lin Mu, he was ready to deal with him. He was insanely embarrassed by her words, not because it was unpleasant, but because he wasn't used to such praise. And she admitted that she didn't recognize him without his clothes on. Then he was even more embarrassed, starting to justify himself by saying that he had just gotten out of the shower a while ago and hadn't had time to get dressed because he hadn't expected to find her here. He assumed she hadn't eaten since yesterday, so he handed her his supply of bread and water. She was very pleased with his attitude and even wept. Tianlei asked her not to cry as he couldn't look at the girl in such a state. She admitted that she was thinking about her death, but then he appeared. Cheng Yao asked him if she could take a shower because she had been in the closet for a long time and smelled bad. Of course, he let her take a shower. After a good soap, she stepped out of the shower. She watched Tianlei from behind and wanted to thank him, but she didn't know how. When he turned around, he didn't expect to find her half naked standing next to him. He took his eyes off her body and asked her to sit down and have something to eat. After she took the bread in her hands, she started sobbing hysterically again. He looked at her with annoyance, as he had never met such crying girls before. But she admitted she was just thinking of her friend when she saw the bread. After all, she was killed in a second-story fall and it was all because of food. She blamed herself for her death because if she hadn't listened to Qian Hao, her friend would still be alive. He explained to her that it was their fault, and her friend was already infected. Suddenly, she was snuggled into his shoulder and wrapped her arm around him. She was scared because zombies were everywhere and she had no idea what to do. After that, she started doing something incomprehensible trying to seduce him. Tianlei was so embarrassed by all this that he asked her not to do anything. He changed the subject, saying that the government had set up a survivor base and he wanted to head there in hopes of meeting a friend. He decided to bring her along as well. Cheng Yao was overjoyed to hear that he hadn't planned to leave her there, but instead decided to take her with him. Her smile stretched to her ears. He didn't really understand her reaction, since his move was already obvious. He repeated his question, asking if she had any plans. Without hesitation, she said yes. Tianlei couldn't offer her anything but to wear his clothes from the dormitory that he had taken. And as he held out the clothes to her, she reached out to him. She kissed him on the lips, though it wasn't reciprocated in a way he hadn't expected. She kissed him on the lips, though it wasn't reciprocated in a way he hadn't expected. He instantly recoiled from her without understanding why she did it. Cheng Yao was grateful to him for saving her, but didn't know how to repay him, so she decided to do it with her body. Inside, he was racked with anger. However, to her, he simply chuckled and said that it was not the time for such jokes, and it was better to get dressed as soon as possible and move on. She didn't like the way he made it look, saying she was never joking. She was ready to give herself to him, provided he didn't hurt her. At this point, he just floated in the back of his mind. He definitely liked the attention from the girl, especially when she offered such things. Suddenly, she began to suspect that he was so shy because it was the first kiss he'd ever had. He jumped out of his seat, pretending not to understand her. Then, with a dissatisfied face, Tianlei said that he had kissed his aunt many times. It made her laugh, since a kiss on the cheek was not a kiss. She was glad to be his first. Their unusual flirtation was interrupted by cries for help. The people in the broadcasting room were begging to be saved, and Zhao Tianlei couldn't ignore it. They jumped off together, but Cheng Yao had no idea what to do. He said that they would have to save them, so that they wouldn't bring zombies with their screams. Several people were in the study huddled against the windowsill. They could hear the embittered monsters walking down the corridor and listened every now and then. Eventually, Tianlei made his way to them, but not in the standard way, but through a tree. He attracted their attention so that they realized that salvation had come, but it was also time for them to act. They were insanely happy to see someone alive outside this room. They had a chance of not going to the afterlife. At least not today. He gestured for them to be quiet and not attract the attention of the zombies. If they made the slightest noise, the zombies would come running toward them. They were very badly scared and shared that when the building was filled with zombies, they hid in the broadcasting room. Tianlei threw them a rope and ordered them to tie it to something since they would have to climb down it. He also asked them not to make a sound. The people tied it to the pipe near the window and one by one began to descend, while Tianlei and Cheng Yao helped them land softly so that it would be quiet. One by one, they climbed down the rope. Everything was going fine. They were following what they had been asked to do. And then the last man was left, and they were close to the end. At that time, Tianlei had already started to hurry him up since the zombies could come to them without a reason, just by searching the entire area. But as luck would have it, it was Liar who was scared out of his mind. He had an obvious fear of heights, so he started to shake and couldn't decide to go down. And as soon as he decided to move, he fell to the ground. And unfortunately, this incident was not without screams, which was very bad. As you might expect, the zombies immediately turned at the sound. They were so evolved that they were able to identify the source even from such a noise. The people immediately rushed out. One of them suggested that they run to the parking lot because there was definitely a car they could get away with. But since everyone wanted to survive, they started pushing. There were a lot of people, but there was no room in the car. We had to make a decision. Tianlei grabbed Liar's shoulder and told him that the girls should get into the car first and then them, but he was in a panic, not wanting to die. The other guys looked back at him, noting that it was because of him, because he had summoned all the zombies with his fall. They started to chase him away without letting him sit down. Then Cheng Yao told Tianlei that she wasn't going with them and planned to stay with him so that he wouldn't force her out of her seat. He was outraged at her statement, saying that it would be very dangerous for her to follow him. She should have gone with them to a safer place. She drew his attention to the fact that even though they had been rescued, they were willing to sacrifice others by getting into the car. And if something happens, they'll throw her out too. It seemed safer to her to be with them, rather than with such cruel people, who at this point stood there and beat the guy's hands to keep him from getting in with them. She looked at him with that pleading look. It was painful for her to look at this picture. Tianlei ordered them to be quiet and took Liara with him. They all shut up, listening to him intently like sheep crowded into a car. He angrily reminded them that they were the ungrateful beasts he had saved. Then the guy behind the wheel apologized to him and to the one they didn't want to take with them. After that, the classmates drove away, leaving the guys alone again. Without wasting any time, the guys headed to the cafe, where Cheng Yao made him a delicious noodle dish that looked quite expensive. She admitted that the supermarket only had frozen food, so she added sausage fish balls and something else she wasn't sure about. He took great pleasure in spooning some noodles onto his fork and decided to check with her to see if she was having a hard time wrapping her mind around it all. But when she stated that she had no problem cooking for her boyfriend because it was her way of showing she cared, he spit out the contents onto the table in surprise. Tianlei's face twisted at what he heard. He couldn't believe that she dared to call him her boyfriend out of nowhere, and she didn't even ask about it. Cheng Yao was again puzzled what she had done wrong because she was so grateful to him, and if he didn't want to take the body, then she rewarded him with her love. He was tired of her pointless attempts to say thank you. Putting his hands on her shoulders and looking into her eyes, he explained that he'd saved her for nothing. And as soon as she said she understood him, he immediately started to put his lips on hers. She wanted to be his girlfriend, and she did it all on her own accord. He was tired of telling her the same thing 100 times. He pushed her away, asking her to stop her attacks and not to confess her feelings to him anymore. She felt so sad that her eyes filled with tears again. She concluded that she didn't like him, or that he hated her after what she had done. Tianling immediately decided to calm her down before she started sobbing. He stated that he didn't hate her, but she had already started screaming without realizing what the problem was. Lowering his gaze to the floor and gathering his thoughts, he made the decision to voice to her the real reason for this behavior. He already had someone he loved. She was amazed to assume it was Sitong. She didn't want to believe it, but she often saw him around her. After giving her assumption and not hearing his response, she lashed out at him for defending her in the library. But he pointed out that she was his best friend. Then Cheng Yao, staring at him with a face expressing no emotion, asked who was his lover, if not their headman. He was embarrassed because he had never told anyone about it before, even though it was obvious. He had to tell her that he was in love with Shinya. Those words literally turned out to be stunning to her, as she staggered, not expecting to hear that superstar Shen Xinyu was his girlfriend. But then he corrected her, saying that a girl like her couldn't be with such a poor man. He just fell in love with her at first sight. Once again, she was surprised to assume that this love could be called unrequited. And Tianlei was particularly uncomfortable with such a conversation. She decided to comfort him by telling him that he should not give up, and especially money will not save him from zombies, and he is an extraordinary man and deserves 100 other girls. So many compliments made him uncomfortable. He didn't think he was a hero. She was actively urging him not to fix his attention on just one. She had already disengaged and started huffing, saying that after what she had experienced in the library, she realized that strength was everything in the present. Lowering her head down, she added that women want to live their lives relying on men and don't care what they do to them as long as they just survive at all costs. And then she jumped into his arms and told him that if he didn't ask her to leave, she would stay. She was willing to do anything for him and be his mistress. He didn't want to upset her, so he told her with fear in his eyes that he would protect her without cooking and laundry and other things. She was so pleased with his kindness, and in gratitude, she threw herself at him again, kissing his neck. Tianlei didn't know how to explain to her, so he gave up. A little while later, they looked into the underground parking lot at the supermarket. He was shocked to see so many expensive cars. Cheng Yu recommended the SUV because of its roomy power output. She obviously knew a lot about cars, but it was a secret. She was driving, so Tianlei grabbed the handles so he wouldn't faint from the speed she was speeding down the road. He was uncomfortable with it. Watching her driving style, he admitted that he couldn't tell that she knew about cars after all, at least in theory, not in practice. She shared that her biggest dream was to drive an SUV on the highway, and it finally came true that day. Looking at the map, they searched for the location of the base for the survivors, as the news did not have time to tell its exact location because the TV was broken. Tianlei was actively looking for where she could be, but Chen Yao also wanted to be useful and help him, so she took her eyes off the road and looked at the map. Several people were standing right in their way, waving for them to stop, but because the driver was not looking at the road, she did not immediately notice them. And of course, when she looked up and saw them, she started to panic, and the car started to rock from side to side, and it looked like it was about to hit them. But they stopped in time. The girl put her hands on the hood and asked to let them in. They said they had escaped from the zombies and asked not to leave them. Tianlei and Chen Yao were shocked looking at these people. They didn't know whether to let them go along with them or if it was too dangerous. And yet they could find no reason not to take them with them. As they thanked them, they sat there with stone faces, unable to realize what had happened. The girl asked them where they were going because zombies were everywhere, and they just couldn't leave Lynette behind. She said it all with a chuckle. But Tianlei had his own question to answer first. They wanted to know who these people were and how they ended up on the highway. She claimed these two guys were her family. The one with the green hair was her brother, and the one with the purple hair was her boyfriend. They had plans, but the flash spoiled them. They managed to escape from the zombies and ran out on the highway to their car. They were sitting in it when it was chaotic, but then they saw them and decided to ask for help. Then she switched to them. Leaning on their seats, she asked if they were a couple. Both blushed immediately, as they were still undecided. But Chen Yao was not confused and turned to her and said that she had good eyesight. She was pleased that she was credited with having a relationship with Zhao Tianlei. After the girl noticed that they were young, not rich, but their car was expensive, she actively implied that they had committed a theft. Suddenly, she noticed the bag in his hands and asked him what was in it. She said that they all hadn't eaten during the day, so she asked them for food. Lest they think they were freeloaders, she offered them an expensive solid gold watch in return, brand name, as payment for groceries. Tianlei took a deep breath and unzipped his bag. He said that there was no point in looking at the time in this situation, so he was willing to share the food for free. Her brother was not at all pleased with the 3 unfortunate sausages. He was indignant, thinking Tianlei was greedy because it wasn't enough, and he had a big bag. Chen Yao couldn't bear to hear their charge. She said that food should be appreciated because they don't have enough, and to be grateful anyway. The brother got very angry when she decided to put him in his place. The girl immediately started to calm him down, explaining that everything was fine and they should thank them. When Tianlei was distracted by their traveling companions, Chen Yao started yelling at him to look ahead. There was something very frightening there, judging from her reaction. Right in their path was a car surrounded on all sides by zombies. They smashed the windows and jumped all over it looking for victims. As they tried to carefully go around them to be unnoticed, the girl was startled by the look of terror in her eyes. When they passed them, some zombies rushed after the car, but they didn't stand a chance because Chen Yao had maxed out her speed. She recognized the car as belonging to a teacher they knew. They assumed he had collided with a zombie while driving and flipped over in a panic. And Chen Yao didn't feel sorry for him in the least. She noticed that it was their own fault because they had been bickering for so long. The girl glanced at her companions and, feeling wildly uncomfortable, asked them to go elsewhere as there were many infected in the city. But even though Zhao Tianlei agreed with her, he still didn't plan to change their route. Looking at his axe, he said that he could let them out of the car. Suddenly, her brother put a gun to his head and ordered him to do everything his sister said, or else he would shoot. And absolutely with a calm intonation, the girl confirmed that it was indeed necessary to obey her. Their trip became as tense as possible. Despite having a weapon resting on his head, Tianlei still wondered who they really were. She smiled disgustedly and noted that they weren't bad at all, but just really liked to drive on the streets. And it all led to one thing. She demanded that they give them their car and their entire food supply, and only on those terms were they willing to keep them alive. Her boyfriend also intervened, adding they better be obedient since her brother had taken 3 people's lives, and if he couldn't take it, no one would stop him. He started yelling again that he was about to shoot them both if they didn't follow their orders and leave the car immediately, leaving the backpack in it. The girl hit him over the head, calling him an idiot, since if he killed them in the car, the smell of blood might trigger the zombies, and they would start chasing them. She turned to Chen Yao and said that if she didn't want her boyfriend's brains all over the car, she'd better give them everything. Chen Yao looked at Tianlei, hoping for help. After all, if they gave up the car, the zombies would eat them, and if not, they would kill him. And then he decided to take responsibility by saying that they would come out, but it was also important for him to know that after that, they would not touch them. Smiling, she simply replied that they could be sure, because she was the kind of person who wouldn't lie to them. There was no convincing in her words. He turned to his companion and told her to park. Chen Yao lowered her head down, as if she didn't want to hear him, but did so anyway. When they got out of the car, the brother told them to move slowly. Then he pointed out that Tianlei could go on, but she should stay where she was. The guy didn't understand why they needed it because it was a lot of trouble, but he added that they had plenty of food, but he would like to have fun with someone. He peeked out again, noting that Chen Yao looked insanely attractive, so she had to go along with them, or rather with him. She started to sob, looking at Tianlei, hoping that he would think of something. But he just silently grabbed her hand and led her towards the forest. This gesture made a guy named Lao Tzu furious, because he could do everything right the first time. He couldn't let anyone ignore him. He caught up with them and pointed his weapon at him again. He wanted to deal with Tianlei at once, so that he wouldn't cause trouble in the future. But he was already tired of tolerating their attitude towards them, so he turned around and separated his hand that was holding the weapon. He immediately curled up in pain. Chen Yao closed her eyes to avoid seeing this horror, and Tianlei stood over him with a menacing look and clarified who he was going to shoot at. The girl, along with her boyfriend, were already rushing towards him to avenge her brother. They were not ready to forgive them so easily for such an act. Chen Yao was very worried about him as she saw the weapons those two were carrying. She covered her mouth to keep from screaming from the nightmare she was witnessing. Before she could even blink her eyes, Tianlei had already dealt with the guy running at him. He just threw an axe at him, hitting him directly in the head. Then he used another weapon to knock the knife out of the girl's hands, leaving her unarmed. She had no choice but to surrender to them. He thought about the fact that after injecting himself with the virus evolution fluid, his reactions and speed had gotten much better. He decided that was the reason. The girl got down on her knees, begging him for mercy. She admitted their mistake and said they had only done it because they didn't want to die. Tianlei, looking her in the eyes, said that it would be wise if they wanted to live so badly for someone else to help them take that step and face death. She started sobbing, pointing out that it wasn't her idea she was just doing. After all, she's just a simple woman following a man's orders. Specifically the orders of the guy with the axe in his head. She admitted that she and her brother obeyed him and were good, and when he's gone, they're free. The girl sat down beside him with her arm around his leg. Looking up at him, she asked him to forgive them, and then she would do whatever he wanted. Chen Yao didn't appreciate her sacrifice. She thought that only a shameless woman could say such a thing because it was so low. Seeing his burning eyes, the girl stood up and embraced him, saying that his girlfriend was too young and inexperienced, and she was capable of bringing him pleasure. Then he smiled and promised her not to take their lives. He knew what was best and what they should have done in this situation. He didn't need any unnecessary blood. Chen Yao was shocked to hear this. She could not believe that he had agreed to such terms with a girl of such behavior. It's very unpleasant. He also added another very important condition that he was not going to help them. The girl was very surprised because she had been counting on that. Taking Chen Yao by the hand, they headed towards the car. He told the one that the sound of the gunshot had attracted the zombies and they only had to wait a little while to enjoy themselves. She was shocked to hear that she and her brother were going to be left in a place where in a few minutes there would be 100 zombies eager to tear them apart. In fact, not even a couple of minutes later, the monsters were already 100 meters away from them. There was no point in running, and the guys were already on their way. She started to shout after them for help, but it was too late. The smoke from the exhaust pipe obscured their bodies, barely allowing a silhouette to be seen. Tianlei was ashamed of himself for scaring Chen Yao by taking that guy's life. He explained that he simply had no other choice, or they would have been finished. He knew she was afraid, but he explained that facing the devil every day was a matter of getting braver. The days didn't get any better. After a moment of silence, she said she just wasn't used to it yet, especially with people who were worse than zombies. She promised him to be stronger, not a ballast. In fact, looking at him, she thought about the real reason she was scared. It wasn't because he'd sent someone to the afterlife. And then when she was in the library, she was there all alone. When everyone turned their backs on her, she thought she'd die alone. But she was wrong. She had met him, and her life was filled with color again, even if it wasn't at the right time. She felt she had to be useful to him. It was the only way she could live. So they reached a place where a lot of cars were piled up. Most of them were not in good condition, dented, overturned, or burnt out. As he got out of the car, he realized that traffic was paralyzed here as well as up ahead. Apparently people had abandoned their cars when they saw the zombies. But luckily, there was a town visible there. Tianlei decided that it was close enough for them to reach it on foot by car anyway. He grabbed her hand and headed toward the town. She noted that the atmosphere was so absent of zombies and people she assumed there were ghosts. Tianlei said that he would rather run into a ghost than a zombie. After all, he would definitely not do them any harm. He noted that ghosts were more cute compared to zombies that fed on humans. She didn't understand how they could be cute at all. Suddenly, she jumped into his arms thinking she had seen a ghost. She started screaming and begging for his protection out of fear. There was a black cat standing on the car who didn't understand what all the fuss was about. He looked at them playfully and then jumped down, going about his business. She kept squeaking, saying that he had scared her to death. Tianlei noticed that she also scared him with her screaming, but not the cat. Suddenly, he turned her around and covered her with him. She didn't immediately realize what had happened, or why he had abruptly decided to protect her. He heard sounds from the zombies. They looked out from behind the car and began to survey the parking lot. He thought there were a lot of zombies, but she couldn't hear anyone and didn't realize where they were. They were making a run for it as they approached that very spot. He realized that the liquid had sharpened his hearing, and he knew the zombies were ahead of them. Hundreds of zombies crowded around one building. They knew only those inside could attract such numbers. Human survivors. And so it was. Those who were in the building made up the cabinets to the door, trying to protect themselves as much as possible from the monsters and block their way. The boys peered around the corner, watching as countless zombies burst through the doors. There weren't even that many near the school. Tian Lang noticed that practically above them was a window through which they could see what was happening inside. Meanwhile, there in the guy's arms lay his sister, barely alive. She felt insanely bad and realized that she had very little time left. He still wouldn't give up and tried to reassure her that she was fine, and when they got out of here, he would take her to the hospital right away. People took notice of them. One man was outraged that the guy, knowing she had been bitten by a zombie, did not throw her out into the street and put them in danger, and he was also supported by another. He asked to leave everyone out of it if he was willing to die with her. Everyone just jumped on him with accusations. The red-haired girl started to lash out at him, claiming he was doing the wrong thing by holding a lifeless body that would soon become a zombie. Looking at Lian Lan, he couldn't believe that she could say such a thing. He felt hard at this moment and didn't want to part with his loved one. Amid talk of many having to say goodbye to their relatives, she ordered him to dump her body before it was too late. He just couldn't believe his ears because his sister had died for saving Lian Lan, and now she dared to say such things to him. The guy yelled at her, saying that his sister liked her so much that she wanted her as her sister-in-law and even gave her life for her. In fact, she admitted she only went after him because she found out his house had been torn down so he could share a couple sweets. Besides, it was her fault. She noted that she no longer had anything to do with him or his sister. She wished she hadn't been involved in such things or put in danger. Suddenly, the girl spoke. She asked her brother to leave her alone and let the people who wanted to get rid of unnecessary problems. She understood them. She didn't want to be that ugly zombie eating people. In the background, she could hear herself screaming that she should do it before it was too late, because she was asking for it. Lian Lan fully supported her words by turning them over, so that she offered to the people to help the girl free herself from unnecessary torment. People were so mad they were ready to throw themselves at the guy if he didn't let them get rid of his sister. They were ready to go to the extreme. But he wasn't ready to just give up, saying that anyone who dared to hurt his little sister wouldn't survive the day. He would end them all. The pink-haired big man lunged at him, wishing him dead. He was tired of listening to these arguments, and it was easier to get rid of them both. But it wasn't to be. The guy managed to lift the jock by the collar with one hand and throw him to the floor. He showed that he's not so easy to take him down. Then Lian Lan intervened, telling them to be careful since he practiced a martial art so strong that even the three couldn't overpower him. The man with the bald spot on his head told everyone to attack him, since there was a much better chance of taking him down. He didn't want to die at the hands of a zombie girl. Chen Yao didn't understand how it was possible for a girl to be saved at the cost of her life, and she didn't care. She had to watch selfish people with no sense of compassion. Looking at Tian Lei, she asked him not to risk his life for such cruel people. After all, they wouldn't be grateful to him anyway. And he was in complete agreement with her. No one down there deserved to be saved, except one. He was the one who had no business being down there. She was worried when she realized he was talking about that guy, but she thought he was selfish too because he knew his sister was infected and was risking the lives of others. He explained to her that he was selfish in protecting his loved ones, and the others were selfish because they only cared about themselves. But she didn't see much difference. Such men may be stubborn, but they're willing to save their man at any cost. He saw in him the best man who could be their comrade. Chen Yao was shocked to hear that he wanted him to join them. She felt sorry for him, but not sorry enough to take him with her. Tian Lei explained that times had changed, and due to these circumstances, they would not only have to face zombies, they needed allies. To protect his loved ones, he has to fight other people, but he can't do it alone. He searched for survivors with the goal of finding someone to save the world with. She looked at him and marveled, since all this time she thought he had saved his classmates and let the robbers into the car because of his mental kindness. Meanwhile, the people managed to quiet the guy down. Two of them grabbed him with their hands. He threatened to send everyone to the other side of the world if anything happened to his sister. The Ambal was in front of him again. He promised to first break his sister's head with a bat and then come back to him and end their conflict. With tears in her eyes, his little sister lay at the feet of the others. She was in incredible pain, not only physically, but also mentally, because she had seen everything. When he ordered everyone to send the girl to the other side, the boy burst into tears, begging them not to touch her. He couldn't do anything because he couldn't move. But as soon as he swung his bat, everyone looked at the stream, hearing the glass shatter. The farewell ceremony was postponed for a while. It was Tianlei who had made a hole in the glass ceiling with his favorite axe. He looked down and realized how disgusting the place was. The people were incredibly happy, thinking that help had come to them and they could finally get out of there. They were cheering and jumping and squealing with joy. But he hastened to disappoint them by saying that there were too many of them and that they could only save one of them. They all looked at each other, not understanding how. The man with the bald head asked for help, saying that he was the president of the company and would definitely repay him. Lian Lan said she wasn't ready to die young. The businessman lashed out at her, saying she would make no contribution to society useless. She insulted him back by saying he was a disgusting pervert. The guys were watching their fight, already knowing exactly who they were going to save. They were incredibly bored with this pathetic spectacle of two disgusting people. And then Tianlei decided to interrupt their interesting conversation by asking the guy if his name was Xiao Yang. It was a good way to speed up and pick him up. He replied that he was right. However, he did not understand why this question arose, for he did not want to stand out like some others, only to be chosen as the lucky one. Everyone was in shock. The guy standing next to them asked if he was crazy because his sister had been bitten by a zombie and was about to mutate. He wondered if they were afraid. Tianlei answered him that he already knew that. However, he was not afraid because he realized that the zombies outside were much more dangerous than the newly formed zombies. In the end, he returned to the question of whether Xiaoyang was willing to go along with them. He indicated to anyone who didn't understand that he had chosen the one who would be saved. The boy picked up his sister in his arms and looked up proudly. He said he was ready to go with him, and if he was going to die, he was going to die outside this place. But Tianlei was not so cruel to the others. He added that when he took the two men away, he would leave a rope for them to get out and run away. But if someone grabbed onto it right away, he would tear it off, leaving them all to perish. Lian Lan immediately regretted telling the guy that she was talking nonsense because she was scared. She defiantly started sobbing, claiming that the girl was like a little sister to her and it was too hard for her to watch her suffer. She kept saying she loved him and they should still get married. When he came to the rope, she wrapped her arms around him, hoping it could still be fixed. She kept telling him she loved him, but he wasn't stupid enough to believe all that nonsense because they had nothing in common anymore. He left her, saying it was her own fault. In the end, she was left staring at him and shouting not so nice words. The first thing they did was to pull the girl out. Cheng Yao held her down so she wouldn't fall while her brother had to climb up to them. Before Tianlei could even reach out his hand to offer Xiaoyang to climb up with his help, he was already on top of them. Such speed was astonishing. Suddenly, all good things came to an end, and his sister started coughing up blood. He immediately ran up to her to help her so she wouldn't start worrying about it. But Tianlei already realized that if her blood turned black, then she would soon turn into a zombie in front of them. It was frightening, but there was no way out. And Cheng Yao still hoped that he had a solution for such a case as always, and had figured out how to prevent her from turning completely. Xiaoyang could hear them whispering amongst themselves, so he decided to tell them in advance that she would not be ballast for them, since he would carry her in his arms. Tianlei wasn't quite happy that he had spent so much energy saving them, yet he didn't even bother to thank them for it, as if he was so heartless. He also decided to ask him one thing, how he was going to run with his sister in his arms with zombies everywhere. It would only slow him down. Xiaoyang felt very sad at this thought. They decided to take him to a safe place where he could think it over and decide the right thing to do. Sitting in the warehouse, he never left his sister's side. When she said she was sick, he held her head against his chest and promised to take her to a doctor. Cheng Yao couldn't take it anymore and asked him not to deceive himself because there was no cure and they didn't have time to look for it. He was just giving false hope. He didn't agree with her. He still thought she could be saved. But the girl stood her ground, calling him stupid. She sank to her knees in despair. Tianlei just sat stone-faced and stared off into the distance while she commented on how pathetic the girl was and had no chance of becoming human. After thinking it over, he decided to voice his thought to Xiaoyang. If his brother wanted to end his sister's suffering, there was only one way he could offer him. Tom wondered what he had to do that, but Tianlei just stood up and handed him his axe and told him to send her to the other world. It was very hard for him to accept. It seemed that he had once again trusted those who, like the others, wanted his little sister dead. The girl was in shock. Sobbing, he wrapped his arms around his sister and started yelling to them that even if she became a zombie, he wouldn't let anyone hurt her or do anything to her even now. Cheng Yao did not give up hope of getting through to him, continuing to claim that she could no longer be saved. She would turn into a zombie that would then destroy them all. Suddenly, his sister grabbed him by his shirt and, barely moving her lips, told him that they were good people, not to argue with them, and it was better to do as they said. It was very painful for him to look at her and realize that she would soon be gone. She kept saying that in order not to attack them after death, she had to be destroyed. Tears sprang from her eyes every now and then. She begged him to do what they wanted so badly that they wouldn't do the zombie thing. He started sobbing, saying he couldn't do that to her. And he couldn't let her go to the next world. He needed her like air. She had one last request for him. She wanted them to fulfill it so that she could say goodbye to them and leave. She told them that her brother, despite his looks, was very good. A bit silly and impulsive, he often fights with people and gets his ass kicked. And before, she always stopped him, but she was about to be gone. So after she was gone, she asked them to take care of him so there wouldn't be any problems. Tianlei promised her that he would keep an eye on him and would never let him do anything stupid. He was ready to keep his word. She turned to her brother and told him not to be sad, to find a normal girl, get married, and travel the world with her, and she would watch them from heaven. When he made her promise, she raised her hand with her little finger out to the side. It was their ritual to make promises on their little fingers, to be sure to keep them. He started sobbing so loudly that the guys themselves couldn't look at it calmly. It wasn't surprising from a crybaby, but Tianlei was also all floaty. Suddenly, the girl's body began to act strangely. She lifted up and put her head down. Her brother started shaking her, not understanding what was happening to her. But it was clear to them. It was not the first time they had seen a person with such behavior, or rather a zombie. Chen Yao was horrified to see her transformed. Tianlei handed him the axe, implying that it was time to end it. He knew he didn't want his sister to become such a monster. She headed towards him, about to attack, and Xiaoyang just covered his face with his hands, unable to raise his hand against his own little sister. Then Tianlei swung around and hit her on the head with all his might. If he didn't do something in the next few seconds, he would have to bury 2 people. He apologized to him for that, but there was no choice. They also had to burn her lifeless body, so that it would never come back to life again. Xiaoyang squeezed her hairpins in his palms. He had promised her that he would try to live married and travel the world. He would definitely keep his word. He turned to them, hoping they would let him go with them. After all, he didn't want to move alone in such a dangerous place. That's what they wanted, and that's why they gladly agreed, citing that it was at least his sister's wish, which they simply couldn't fail to fulfill. Tianlei extended his hand to him, saying that he was glad to see them. They had started their acquaintance in the wrong place, so they had to catch up. In search of a safe place for the night, they found a hotel. It was decided to stay there for the night, and in the morning, to move on and look for a base. He told them about how there were all the amenities of a working toilet and a working shower, but Xiaoyang just stood in the aisle staring ahead. He felt a little awkward with them because he didn't even know their names. Then Tianlei introduced himself and her, saying that they were college students. He also noted that he was older than him, so he could call him either Tianlei or brother Tianlei. The main thing for him was that he was comfortable being with them. Cheng Yao also decided to ask him about his life, so that he could tell her a little about himself. It seemed to her that he had moments that they didn't even know about. She was actually curious about how he met the girl, even though he trusted her, and she used him. Tianlei listened to her and was amazed at who he was sitting with. Then he shared that he was born into a rural family. His parents passed away early, leaving only his siblings. He studied martial arts to become stronger. And about Lian Lan, he noted that she was introduced by relatives. Until today, he was amazed that such a pretty girl had agreed to be with him. He said that the 3 of them had gone to the park for a walk when the outbreak started. Lian Lan fell down while running away from the zombies, and his sister protected her when she was hit by the zombies. Cheng Yao was annoyed to hear that. She decided that everything that bitch said was nonsense, and the only one who deserved to die from a zombie bite was her. She started convincing him that he was a normal guy who also knew kung fu. She assured him that there was a girl 100 times better who would really love him. If it seemed to him that she was referring to herself with all her words, she was not. She immediately hugged Tianlei, saying that she already had such a favorite person. Suddenly, her boyfriend's emotions changed, and he became very serious. He heard the familiar sounds that zombies made. But neither Cheng Yao nor Xiaoyang had heard anything like that, and they seemed to be completely silent. It wasn't. He looked out the door and found the zombies running erratically down the hallway. They were as close as they could get, so they wouldn't be able to escape unnoticed. They were shocked to hear about it. Xiaoyang wondered how they had gotten through the iron gate, especially if they had checked everything. They must have been in the room. Without hesitation, he offered his companions to deal with them so that they could rest in peace. But Xiaoyang was clearly not used to such offers. He was very surprised to hear that they had to go out to the zombies and destroy them all at will. But Cheng Yao hurried him to do manly things. When they went out the door, Tianlei told him that he would protect him in case of trouble, but since they were guys, they had to deal with the zombies on their own. As soon as they took a step, the creatures came at them in droves, but it did not frighten them, for they were armed to stand for their lives. One by one, Tianlei was killed. He was very impressed that after each zombie was killed, he could see the points increase in real life. His partner was doing pretty well for his first time too, but it all came crashing down when she showed up. He felt like his sister was attacking him. Tianlei noticed that he was struggling to resist her. He ordered him to put aside all fears and attack her. It was just necessary for him. Cheng Yao was watching through the door and was very frightened when several zombies came at Xiaoyang. She attracted a few with her scream. He couldn't stand to watch him let himself be sprawled on the floor. He shouted at him to wait for nothing, and finally sent her to the other side. But even in this guise, Xiaoyang couldn't touch his sister. It was very hard for him to hurt her. He just couldn't get over himself and do it. Cheng Yao looked out from behind the door, and after making sure the zombies weren't breaking in anymore, she shouted at Tianlei that he couldn't do it without his help. It was scary to watch. But he explained to her that Xiaoyang had the impression that if he had comrades, he could rely on them, so he couldn't kill a zombie without them. Finally, he said loudly that they were going to bed. The guy was very hurt by these words, and thought that they had abandoned him without even bothering to help him. They started walking into the room without turning around. The girl was worried that he would be eaten by zombies, but he didn't care about the extra reason to meet his sister there. In fact, they were watching his reactions and behavior to see how things would change when he realized he was alone and needed to save himself without help. He really had some kind of superpower in him, as he immediately threw his sister off him and started beating her furiously, as if she was his main enemy in life. The boys were amazed at the power he'd been hiding from them all this time. He managed to crush the zombie's head in one blow. It was truly powerful. But Tianlei had had enough. He approached the guy, continuing to beat the lifeless body of the zombie he saw his sister in. He had already dispersed. Tianlei was surprised when he turned around and pointed his fist at him. He didn't understand why he did that, but thanks to his reaction, he stopped him. As it turned out, the main reason for his attack was the inaction of his comrade. He was very offended that when he was attacked, he just watched. Instead of apologizing, Tianlei just told him that if he hadn't helped him, he would have died that day in the supermarket, but he was alive. Seeing that he was still angry, he explained that he had taken him with him, only to help him in battles he wasn't even capable of defending himself. Immediately, Xiaoyang tried to justify that it was his sister, but he didn't realize that once she became a zombie, she was just a monster. Tianlei repeated that he wanted him to change. He asked him to stop thinking that it was his sister. It wasn't her anymore. It wasn't her. Cheng Yao supported him by saying that he was right. She reminded him that his sister was worried about him before she died, and how upset she would be if she knew he had been bitten. He finally repented, letting go of all his grudges. He admitted that he was too impulsive when he attacked his comrade with his fists. He bowed before Tianlei in gratitude for saving his life. From that day on, he made the decision to call him his big brother. Xiaoyang assured them that he would follow them to the end, and would no longer allow himself to be so soft as to protect them rather than endanger them. He finally calmed down, realizing that his lesson had worked properly. He put a hand on his shoulder, telling him not to disappoint his sister. In the morning, they watched the news about the No. 6 base in Yuzhou. It was protected by the army, but could hold no more than 100,000 people. Cheng Yao noticed that Tianlei was upset. He used to think that this was a good thing, and didn't think about the potential danger that awaited them. She didn't know what he was talking about because the base was the safest place on the planet, but there were more than 100,000 people in Yuzhou. He did the math. There were 100 million people in the city, and even if only a tenth of them survived, there wouldn't be enough space at the base. It seemed to him that these bases looked like a rescue platform for the survivors, but once the population exceeded the limit, there would be trouble. Those who got there first just won't let the others in. There will be chaos that even the government won't be able to handle. Food will be scarce. Xiaoyang remembered his grandfather's words. When his village was flooded and the road was destroyed, they were trapped, and without food, they began to eat each other. She didn't immediately realize where they were going with this. Fearing that her fears would be confirmed, she asked if they were going to go to the base anyway. Tianlei wanted to say no, but they had to go there because all their friends had gone to the base after hearing the news, but they didn't have high hopes for it. He repeated what he'd said 100 times before. The time had come when you didn't have to believe everyone else. You had to rely on yourself, believing only in yourself. When Xiaoyang looked up, he found that a red beam was shining directly at him. He was very surprised, not understanding where it came from or who needed it. Without thinking long, they just decided to follow him, and came to the conclusion that he had gotten to them from the building that was across the street from them. And they were quite right. A small company was watching them through binoculars. They were insanely happy to find living people in the neighboring building. They started waving their arms in the hope that they would notice them, because they were just looking out their window, having followed the laser. They had some hope of escape. Tianlei tried to shout to them to find out what they had going on there, but their window was too far away for them to hear him. Then Xiaoyang volunteered to talk to them using gestures. He said he was pretty good at it. Of course, no one objected because there was no other way. He was making very strange waving motions, trying to translate what his comrade wanted to know. They didn't know if they understood, but at least they hoped they did. People looked at him like he was a fool because they didn't understand anything. They only assumed it was sign language, but none of them knew it. Cheng Yao was curious where he learned these gestures, but he himself could not clearly answer this question. He thought he had memorized them while watching TV. Tianlei concluded that the survivors were trapped in the building. They had to go there immediately and investigate on their own. The people who were trying to communicate with the survivors across the street were approached by their company CEO. He didn't understand what they were doing there. They pointed him to a window across the street in the hotel and told him that they had found people there who they thought might be able to help them and get them out. Apparently, they had been watching around for a long time, hoping to see more survivors because Gu Weiping immediately grabbed the guy's binoculars to take a look. But unfortunately, he didn't see anyone there. People started to panic, saying that a few minutes ago, they had seen 3 20-year-old students from some school there. Hearing this, the general freaked out as he misunderstood them because he didn't need any students. He was hoping to meet people from the army. He explained that there was no way the 3 schoolboys could protect themselves, let alone them. He did not want the workers to have false hopes for the boys. Unnoticed, the company's chairman, Zhen Bingyang, entered the office. She said that he was wrong, and it was likely that they were capable of saving them. He turned to her and her assistant with his head down. He had to apologize to her for his impatience and curiosity. Everyone wanted to survive. Still, Gu Weiping insisted that the teenagers in his opinion couldn't help them with food and water. He suggested sending people to check if there were any zombies in the building. Then the secretary got into the conversation and with some pressure asked him if he was hungry. This was said reproachfully, not out of real interest. She made a point of saying that Zhen Bingyang had distributed the food evenly to everyone and encouraged her to save money, and that the fact that he ate it so quickly was his problem. He didn't like her tone at all, so he replied that being a secretary, she couldn't be so arrogant and interfere in their conversation anyway. But the chairman grounded him, saying she was right. As representatives of the company, they were responsible for the employees and could not risk them. He resented the decision. He said he thought it was wrong to just sit there and wait for a miracle, but he had to explore the area to get out. It seemed to her that if all was well, the state would act and send a rescue team to look for survivors. She waved her hands, urging everyone present to check for a network. And if anyone had one, they could contact the military instead of going out. Zhen Bingyang was sure that they should have faith in the government and not give up hope. She assured them that they would be rescued soon. The CEO didn't like the speech, and even more disliked was the fact that the rest of the company's employees supported it. To all this enthusiastic shouting, he came. Even the chairman was surprised and a little frightened as Mr. Yamada himself stood in front of them. He was the director of research and development for another company. He wanted to protest to her what she had just said. Yamada came to talk about cooperation, but there was an outburst. He demanded a solution to the problem to leave their country, or he would file a lawsuit against them. The girls immediately lowered their heads and started bowing. They dreamed of cooperating with him, and Zhen Bingyang apologized to him for the unexpected events. She looked up and said she couldn't take him to the plane because there were a lot of zombies outside, and it would be dangerous to leave the building. She didn't want to take any chances. She explained that they were already working on it and hoped he would calm down. She also promised to reimburse him for all his expenses when it was over. Looking up at her, he said that he hoped that they valued their reputation, so she would keep her promise that she had just made. Afterwards, she asked Gu Weiping to take Mr. Yamada back to the office so he could rest. He certainly went to see him off. The girls breathed a sigh of relief, though not for long. The secretary was curious if the chairwoman really believed that the military would send them help. She wasn't really sure about that. She had to say so as not to create unnecessary panic among the people they were responsible for. She reminded her that there was only 2 days worth of food left, and if no one arrived by then, something terrible would happen. People could go crazy. When they started to leave, Tongxi said that then they would have no other choice. So they would have to follow the CEO's suggestion. As soon as Yamada entered the office, he immediately began to eat. He said that if he had known this would happen, he would never have come to them. Shoving another piece of meat into his mouth, he wondered why Gu Weiping hadn't come out yet. After all, he had nothing to say to him. It was just a thought out loud. As it turned out, the CEO had been waiting for the right moment. He shared that he hadn't eaten anything for 2 days and would like to take something from Yamada, but he didn't appreciate the insolence. He thought he was sick if he dared to ask such a question. He had brought this food for himself and would eat it until they were rescued. Then Gu Weiping reminded him that when they didn't bring him food, they shared it with him and his secretaries, and now he had a large supply. He was already scared to voice it all, and when the principal switched to a high-pitched tone to drive him away, drops of sweat ran down his face. He turned around, lowering his head to leave, while he sat on the couch, with the girls scrambling for food and giggling. It was such a pig. Suddenly, he called out to Gu Weiping as he was about to open the door. He who doesn't work doesn't eat. He had a favor to ask of him for which he could repay him with food. The general manager was very happy that he had a chance to fill his stomach. He was ready to fulfill his every request as long as he got food for it. Yamada admitted that he never had any desire to work with their company. He came here for one reason. He wanted their chairman. Gu Weiping's eyes widened when he heard that he thought Zhen was the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. With a chuckle, he said that if he managed to bring her to him, then all the food that was on the table would be his. It would just take a little effort and work it off. Gu Weiping was very scared because he realized that she was his boss and was afraid that if he did this, his career would be ruined. And with it, his whole life. Yamada only laughed at his words. He thought their country was already over, and it was foolish to worry about his reputation in it. He added that's why he's worried about Zhen, and he hit a nerve by saying that he's just the CEO while even the secretary belittles him. He obviously didn't want the job, and Yamada promised him that if he honored his request, when they got out, he would make him a director of his company. And he also noticed that in their country, the girls were much more gentle, so he wouldn't lose anything by moving. On the contrary, he would gain. Even though Gu Weiping had no face on Gu Weiping after everything he had heard, he still accepted his offer. He really wanted to believe that he would fulfill his promise. Keeping a sly smile on his face, Yamada stated that he always kept his word and should never be doubted. He tossed him the bread as a deposit. Meanwhile, the guys had already entered their building. They were surprised that it was so quiet. Xiaoyang assumed that the zombies had left and the people were afraid to come out. But with his acute hearing, Tianlei knew very well that there were at least 20 zombies on their floor and even more on the floor above. They were amazed at his incredible hearing. Since none of them had heard a sound, it seemed to them as ordinary people that the building was quiet and peaceful. Tianlei's gaze was caught by the mannequins holding real pirate sabers. The thought that they could take them immediately crossed his mind. He threw one of them to Li Xiaoyang. He clearly didn't expect to hold such a weapon at some point in his life, but he was very curious to try it out. He immediately saw his dumbfounded look and explained to him that fighting with bare hands and martial arts was not the same as fighting with weapons. And Xiaoyang was only happy about it. He always wanted to try something new, so he started swinging it from side to side. The sword was not bad at all. While they were looking at their weapons, they didn't notice that the zombies had already approached them. They were frightened when they heard the screams of Chen Yao, who was very afraid of them. Tianlei immediately indicated that he could deal with them on his own because the points were not unreasonable, while Xiaoyang was required to protect their friend. At the same time, Gu Weiping knocked on the chairman's office. The girls were very surprised to see him, thinking that something had happened since they had seen each other recently. Sweat was running down his back as he found it very hard to lie to them. He tried to hold back as much as possible and with a shaky voice asked to discuss something. Tongshai wasn't ready to let him get close to Jen, so she decided to clarify what he wanted to talk to her about. There was no need for idle talk. He tried to explain to them that they had so little food that they wouldn't be able to survive until the rescuers came to them. They had to make a decision. All this led to him and Yamada coming up with a plan to save themselves, and then he came to invite Jen into his office to discuss their idea. Tongshai was a little anxious and had a bad feeling. She told the chairman her concerns about the principal and didn't want to leave them alone. Gu Weiping, on the other hand, was displeased to hear her words. He thought about the fact that she had never accepted him, thinking his ideas were strange. He wanted to give her up too. Finally, Zhen Bingyang also started talking to him. After listening to their dialogue, she decided that he wanted to discuss with her the plan he had come up with Yamada. He confirmed that she got it right. They had doubts about what they'd come up with, so they needed her opinion. Her word is final. Gu also added that if her secretary was so worried about her life, then it wouldn't be a problem to go along with them. It would be safer and calmer for the girls. Meanwhile, Xiaoyang was revealing more and more. He also managed to defeat a few dozen zombies that the guys didn't even have to exert themselves. They immediately praised him, saying that he had adapted quickly, and compared to his behavior a day ago, he was a different person. But he didn't think so. He cited that his sword was just too handy, which made it easy for him to kill monsters. Then Cheng Yao noticed the elevator and called out to the guys. But Tianlei reminded her that the electricity is unstable, and the elevator might not stop. It's too dangerous. But she was afraid that if they didn't take the elevator, they'd have to take the stairs. And on every floor, there was a huge number of zombies. As usual, Tianlei paid attention to the place he could get through, the ventilation room. He was sure that the zombies couldn't meet them there. Meanwhile, Gu Weiping had already brought the beauties to Yamada. He was satisfied that he was able to complete the task he had been assigned. Food and position were almost in his pocket. They stared at the way he greeted them. He looked as if he hadn't been expecting it, sprawled out on the couch, moaning from the massages the girls were giving him. But they didn't dwell on it. Jen decided to cut to the chase, asking about the rescue plan they had prepared for her to test. Since he had no idea what Gu had come up with to lure her here, he didn't immediately realize what plan she was talking about, but he figured it out in time. While he was talking about the magnificence of his plan, Tongxi noticed the food on his table. She was indignant because he said it was gone. Yamada tried to get out of it by saying that he'd thought so before until he found his supplies in his luggage. He wasn't the least bit ashamed of it. The secretary couldn't stand it and decided to say that he was selfish for not sharing his food with everyone else when they had been starving for a long time. But Jen stopped her flow of emotions, saying that it was not worth it to rake up what had already passed. It was just pointless to think about the future. Yamada stood up and, approaching her, offered them his food so they wouldn't eat more than a couple bites a day. And at that moment, he pulled her to him by her soft spot. Amid her secretary's screams, she looked him in the eye. Jen was scared out of her mind because she couldn't imagine that the principal could do that to her. But instead of an adequate attitude, he just made a face and said that he just decided to charge them for the food he would give them afterwards. He threw her on the couch and tried to climb on top of her while repeating that he had been thinking about her for a long time and wanted her to give him pleasure. Tong Shai was furious. She rushed towards them to stop the principal from doing those things he saw in his filthy places. But she didn't have time to be blocked by Gu Weiping. With one strong punch, he knocked her to the floor. He didn't care about all of them or how they ended up. Tong Shai was amazed at the disgusting act of hitting a woman. She didn't want to confront him, but she was disappointed, and he was just laughing. He thought they were to blame for this, because they had treated him like garbage all these years, and now the hour of reckoning had come. Yamada started undressing and listened to what the CEO was saying. He certainly liked the way he stood up for himself and spoke out at last. Zhen Bingyan sobbed, begging her to let go, screaming for help, while this vile man touched her body trying to take advantage of her. He was completely indifferent to her cries. He knew that the staff couldn't hear her because they were in the conference room and the soundproofing saved the day. The boys' plan went slightly awry at the same time. They accidentally fell into the office through the ceiling. The ventilation just couldn't handle them. They were shocked when they saw what was happening there. Xiaoyang felt ashamed that he had caught people in such an awkward moment when they were making love. But Tianlei brought him back by saying that what was going on was not what he thought. There was no love there, only abuse of women. Tongxi started sobbing and begging them to help them, as they didn't have the strength to fight back against these lustful animals. This was their chance to save themselves. Yamada didn't care what they were doing or if it was legal. He didn't hesitate to order them out of the room and keep him busy. Of course, the guys denounced him. Tianlei immediately realized he wasn't from China, and Chen Yao was angry that someone managed to do such things while there was chaos outside. Xiaoyang didn't want to wait and think about what to do with these people. He immediately grabbed his sword and swung at Yamada, wanting to finish him off. His female aides, Gu Weiping, immediately ran to the exit as they were afraid that they would suffer the same fate for their assistance. They realized it themselves, but it was not to be. The fat man was not simple and deftly dodged his blow in a pose reminiscent of a martial arts class. Xiaoyang immediately guessed that although he was overweight, he was trained in the same techniques as him. This made it a little difficult for him, but it didn't scare him. Tongxi rushed to her boss, afraid that something might have happened to her because she was under a lot of stress. She needed to comfort her. Yamada wasn't stupid either and realized that his opponent had kung fu. He wanted to see which one of them was stronger with the same technique. Moreover, he conditioned him that as real men, they should fight barehanded without weapons. It seemed fairer to him. Xiaoyang had no problem tossing his sword aside, saying that he didn't need it, as he could handle it with his bare hands. That was how confident he was. The fat man threw himself at him, saying that he was ready to ruin them all so that he could later entertain the beautiful chairman in peace. He couldn't wait. When one attacked, the other successfully dodged. It was hard to see which of them could come out of the fight victorious, but everything was under control. Chen Yao was already getting worried and offered Tianlei to help him because Yamada was strong enough. But he asked him not to interfere because he believed in Xiaoyang. They fought with dignity, alternately repelling their opponent's attack or dodging. It was clear that whichever of them won, they were both incredibly strong. After a few minutes, Xiaoyang finally grabbed Yamada's head and smashed the glass table with it, thus making him lose consciousness for seconds. Since he'd been confident from the start, he wondered if that was all he was capable of. He spat at him in contempt. He lay on his back and started crying and begging for mercy. He admitted that he was wrong and had lost. He did not want to die, so he decided to surrender. The guys were very happy for him, especially Cheng Yao, who jumped up and down in joy because she was cheering for him so much. But as soon as he turned his back, Yamada stood up. And it seemed like there was nothing wrong with that since he had already admitted defeat. But he didn't, and Tianlei realized it. He called out to the boy, just as the fat man was rushing toward him with a knife in his hand. He wanted to send him to the afterlife so that no one would ever threaten him again. But Xiaoyang intercepted his hand and punched him in the face with all his might, so hard that he flew away from him and fell beside the sofa. It's definitely over now. Cheng Yao looked at this and marveled at Yamada's cunning, who himself had offered a fair fight in the beginning, even though he was actually holding a gun in his pocket. Xiaoyang thanked his big brother for calling him to help him choose the right path, and now he could stand up not only for himself, but also for the others. Tianlei didn't see anything wrong with that, just pointing out that the Americans were different from the Chinese. When it comes to a fight, you have to be more careful. At that moment, a crowd of workers who were very worried about their chairman burst into the office. They had no idea what was going on in there. Then Gu Weiping got nervous and knelt down in front of her and begged for forgiveness. He said that Yamada made him do it, but he wouldn't listen to him anymore. Tongxi couldn't watch it. After what he had done, she wanted to punch him in the face with all her might. She did so without wanting to hear it. She turned away from him and cried. She was incredibly hurt that Zhen had always trusted him, but in a critical situation, he had sold her for food. Angry people rushed at him and grabbed him by the collar. They wanted to beat him up for betraying their chairman by deceiving her. They wanted revenge. While writing to Yamada, the secretary asked her boss what she planned to do with those who betrayed her. She wanted to kill them. But Jen was more favorable because she simply ordered the two of them tied up and locked in a back room, and then hand them over to the rescue team. Gu Weiping begged her to give him another chance when he was captured, and Yamada did not repent, but only threatened them with his connections, saying he would sue them. Tianlei, on the other hand, came over to taunt him, telling him that after the outbreak, his nuclear weapons realm had turned into a zombie lair and there was nowhere to return to. The girls who were always around the principal rushed to Tianlei, claiming that they were innocent and wanted him to help them. But that problem was handled by Cheng Yao, who immediately got into their hair, annoyed that they instantly switched to another guy. Zhen Bingyang ordered them to be tied up as well, but to lock them in the conference room instead of the back room. It seemed like the most appropriate solution to her. Tianlei didn't like her tone. Calling Jen an older sister as he was used to doing, he asked her not to tell them what to do. After all, they were not her people. The secretary was just shocked at the way he addressed her, and the chairman started poking at him, angry because the stranger dared to call her that. After a while, everyone calmed down and gathered around the table. Tongxi tried to ease the tense situation by offering them a drink of water. The colleagues there were whispering amongst themselves, discussing that they had never seen Zhen Bingyang so angry. At 24, she hated those who called her senior. Blushing either from shame or pain, Tianlei commented that instead of thanking her for saving them from the Americans' violence, she started beating them. She decided that they were not in their right mind, because it was clear that he was doing everything against her will. If Tongxi had called for help, they wouldn't have been needed. The conflict was escalating. Tianlei was angered that they were being made to blame for the situation, and he was already regretting helping. Jen was getting angrier. Tongxi decided to take matters into her own hands and asked everyone to calm down. She apologized for the chairman's behavior and thanked them on her behalf. She decided to change the subject by inviting them to introduce themselves. She first introduced Zhen Bingyang, who was drinking coffee, and herself as her assistant. Cheng Yao looked at her and couldn't believe that Zhen Bingyang, a graduate of the Chinese Business Academy, was sitting in front of her. Her excitement was unparalleled. She knew about her from the bibliography. She shared that she had read about how she started her own company and gave internships to others. Without hiding her shyness, she confessed that she had always considered Jen her idol. Moreover, she treated her as if she were a goddess. But Tianlei wasn't so happy. He said he wasn't surprised that her company was acting so bossy, because it was all up to the chairman to behave like this. He said that he had come to them for an internship last summer, but his application was rejected because he was wearing an old shirt. Even the interviewer himself laughed at him, saying he was poor, and without asking anything, even though he met their requirements, he was sent home. He added that maybe that person was bad, but the image of the employee is the face of the company. She disagreed, saying that you should dress decently. He also noticed that other students who excelled in their studies did not pass in addition to him. Only the rich ones were taken instead. This was clearly not a coincidence. Then she turned to Tongxi to ask if it was true. She admitted that Gu Weiping was responsible for it and that he really only took the rich. He advised her that since their internship was only for the affluent class, there was no need to give hope to the common people. Then she had to go on record about the negligence of their leadership and apologize to him and his classmates for treating non-rich individuals in such a manner. The company employees were shocked, judging Tianlei. They asked him to forget about the past and not to remember these trivial things at a time like this. After all, the most important thing was to survive. One man wondered if there was no communication inside the building, what was going on outside. They wanted to know when the military would come to their rescue. Tianlei looked at his friends and replied that zombies were all over the world. If they wanted to wait for the military to help them, he advised them not to do so. To their surprised looks, he explained that although the government had promised, they had never once encountered a rescue team when they left the school. Those words caused panic among the people who would die here. The man decided to find out if there was any other way to survive. They didn't want to live in the building. But he said the vent was so narrow that the three of them could barely get through and the others couldn't. And even if they get to the first one, there's danger outside. Then came the obvious question from the chairman as to whether there was any other option. And when they heard that there was, they all started shouting with happiness. With great importance, he leaned back in his chair and said that they had been through a lot they would like to eat and rest, because when the stomach is full, the brain works better. Tianlei gave them a hint, saying that the office looked pretty good. He turned to Jen again, calling her big sister and asking her to show some sincerity. Her eyes filled with rage. She knew he was doing it on purpose, but she obeyed anyway and asked everyone to leave the room so they could rest. Standing in the hallway, they were discussing the guys. They thought they were good and could really save them, but she thought she had to rely on herself. She ordered her secretary to find the floor plan of the building and find other exits so they would have a better chance of getting out of this trap. People wanted to know if they had any food left. Many colleagues had not eaten for several days. They asked for some food. It was hard for her to say this because once she discovered Tongxi's growth, she told them that all the food had been distributed to them, but they didn't want to cause a panic. And no sooner had the people been outraged than a man walked in holding an entire backpack filled with food. While they were standing there discussing, he acted. When he dumped it all on the table, people wondered how he had gotten so much in tasty food. From that moment on, he could claim to be a favorite. But Jen Bingyang wasn't so pleased because she was starting to guess where he got it. She didn't understand how he got the backpack of those guys in the office. He said that he saw the three of them go into the other room and quietly snuck in and stole their backpack. He said it with complete gusto. The chairperson and her assistant were outraged, saying that this was a real theft. They felt that this was not the right thing to do and that everything should be returned to them. But the others didn't agree with them, having already grabbed all the supplies. He reminded them of the situation they were in, and they were all hungry. Jen still insisted that they couldn't do that to them because they were going to help them, and if you deprive them of food, they won't save them. He shared that he had researched their building before and learned that there was simply no other solution. The only solution they have is the vents. She didn't fully believe that this was a working method, but the man wondered why she trusted them so much, since they had done nothing wrong for them. He tried to reason with her, saying that since the situation was so dangerous, how could they help them? And if the zombies could be handled by three, then so could they. The man promised after they had eaten, he would go downstairs with his male colleagues, and if there were no problems, he would contact them. The others supported him, saying they were ready to go with him. They would have to starve anyway, but they could at least try to find a way out. Tang Shi pointed out that Wang Zhen was right and should try to let them do it, and if they failed, they would try the ventilation duct. He was glad he'd been given the go-ahead after all. He promised that they would be careful going downstairs and try not to run into any zombies. Wang Zhen was the first to climb out of the vent. He looked around and informed his men that everything was clear, and they too could climb out after him. They struggled to fit through there, judging each other for punching someone in the face. But the vent was too narrow to squeeze their legs together at the knees. When they came down, one of their colleagues asked them to keep their voices down so the zombies wouldn't hear. But they thought the panic was unnecessary and better than expected. Wang Zhen repeated to them that the chairman and secretary had been deceived by the three disciples. After all, they hadn't observed the zombies they were talking about so much. They agreed with him, saying that the chairman had indeed been cheated, but one of them didn't realize how much longer they had to stay in the building. Suddenly, one stepped on a black liquid spilled on the floor. His shoes seemed to stick for a second. The others didn't notice, but he turned around, and he saw behind the statue the lifeless body of a zombie. It was like it was staring at them with its empty eyes. It was very creepy, but luckily, he was no longer alive. The colleagues immediately started to panic and screamed when they saw this monster in front of them. But Wang Zhen was undeterred, believing that he could no longer harm them. He leaned towards the zombie and saw a crack on its forehead. He decided that it had been sent to the grave by Zhao Tianlei's axe. After all, he had had this weapon for a long time. Others were surprised, but knew from the movies that a blow to a zombie's head could kill it. This fact was necessary for them to survive in the future. And now he's found something valuable. In the clothes of the zombies were the keys to the building, which could not but please them because they wanted to get out of there so much. But no sooner had he admired them than a blue hand grabbed his hand. In fact, the zombie was alive and just pretending or unconscious. They were about to flee, but Wang Zhen stopped them, saying that if Tianlei's disciple could handle them, then they should not be afraid. He tossed the keys to one of his co-workers and grabbed the statue next to them. He swung it at the zombie running at them. There was only one chance of escape, and he took advantage of it by hitting him on the head. When the zombie fell to the floor, he began to beat him mercilessly to send him to the grave. They started praising him when they realized that that was it. They thought he was the best, just God, and didn't even realize they had such a strong man with them. He added that these zombies were not scary and could be easily killed. He thought that as long as they were together, surviving the outbreak wouldn't be a problem for them. Meanwhile, the guys were walking down the hallway and realized that those closed the door with only their company allowing the zombies to get in. At least the floor was safe. Tianlei pointed out that when the management is brainless, others have to suffer. In this way, he was of course alluding to Zhen Bingyang, the chairman of the company. Cheng Yao said that she didn't think he was stingy, and even though he had been denied an internship that year, it didn't matter now. She knew that she really understood a lot of things. But it's not like he didn't consider that rejection unimportant. He had to push back 2 part-time jobs and focus on preparing for the interview where the rejection came. His poor friend had to work at a construction site because he was suspended from school due to debts. Eventually, one rainy day, he fell from the top floor. So he's a cripple, and no one will compensate him for his health. Nobody's going to take care of him, and it's all because of a fucking waiver. Nobody cares. The higher the position, the more responsibility. Every word of that big shot affects the other, and if they can't take responsibility for their words, it's better not to take it. Cheng Yao was delighted by his speech. She thought that a hero and a leader are different. A hero fights, unites people, and wishes loyalty to the leader. He was a little puzzled when she said that he had the qualities of a leader, since he made people believe and led them down the right path. She was embarrassed, but she decided to voice what had been eating at her since they'd met. She wasn't sure he'd stay with her to the end. He walked over to her and ruffled her hair, telling her she was a fool for thinking such thoughts. She was too precious to him to just let go. Her eyes filled with happiness when he said that they were not just acquaintances to him, but teammates, so he planned to always be with them. They continued down the corridor discussing what he had said today, but Chen Yao kept insisting that he should make peace with the chairman. In the end, when they entered the office, they found that their backpack had disappeared. They realized that someone had taken it, and it wasn't hard to guess. Sitting in the office, Jen was worried about how the men were doing because there was no way out, but Tongxi had faith in them because they were smart and wouldn't risk it. Suddenly, the guys burst in with indignation. Without prelude, Tianlei immediately asked about where they had shared his backpack of food, and Cheng Yao saw their table. A table with wrappers on it. They began to resent the fact that they had stolen and eaten their food. They were offended that they had not told about their need for food. Tianlei rolled his eyes and asked Jen why she had done that. This time, he wanted to hear her explanation, not her secretary's. They saved them, and in return, they decided to thank them by stealing their food. He admitted that if he had known they were so mean, he would never have helped them. Tongxi admitted in a shaky voice that they had done wrong, but it was only a few packets of food. She said that they would give them back what they had taken later. Then Xiaoyang also spoke, saying that although he was not an excellent student, he understood perfectly well that taking things without asking was not borrowing, but stealing. Finally, she spoke. She said that they were wrong to take their food without asking, but that their people were already looking for a way out. Then they would give them twice as much. But Tianlei only rolled his eyes when asked if they really believed that their people could return. Under the current circumstances, it seemed naive. He explained that they had been on the first floor for less than half an hour, and on the floor above, it had taken an hour. He wondered how long their men had been gone. The girls looked at each other. Tongxi had said that they had gone to look for a way out 2 hours ago. They had already begun to suspect something wrong. Meanwhile, the men were sitting on the floor eating noodles. They hadn't had a chance to eat such a delicious meal in days, all thanks to Wang Zhen. One of them was surprised at the ingenuity of his colleague. He was curious how he knew there was so much food in this place. He shared that he knew there was a modeling agency on the second floor. They weren't allowed to eat much, but one model hid a stove and food there. He had been lucky enough to see that picture earlier and find out what she was hiding there. And when he saw those keys, he remembered that one of the rooms was well stocked. The other said that after they finished eating, they should return to their own, so they wouldn't worry about them, and not to suspect anything. But his colleague disagreed with him and thought the plan sucked. He didn't want to go back to the place where the chairwoman was too stupid and gullible. They believed that she was incapable of thinking rationally, even in such troubled times didn't come up with a rescue plan, and allowed herself to be molested by Yamada. All this man was saying was that it was better to follow Brother Zhen and eat meat instead of sitting around and hoping for someone. They still had a long way to go. Eventually, the guy gave in and accepted their position, saying he was willing to follow him and would do whatever he told them to do, just to find the right path. Their new leader noted that they have always been good colleagues and will always be his friends, and as long as they trust him, he will consider them his brothers. He reminded them of the saying that a crisis is also a turning point. They were once someone's employees, but times have changed and they can create their own business. Their conversation was interrupted when they heard a strange zombie-like sound. Someone was standing outside their door trying to get in. Wang Zhen asked them not to panic and was ready to deal with the zombies. He explained that they only looked dangerous, but they were actually stupid and easy to kill. He decided to go to the door to look through the keyhole. He ordered them to draw their weapons and be ready to hit the zombies at their weakest point, which was their heads. Eventually, as the sound grew closer, he moved away to a safer distance, and they all stood together, waiting for that particular guest to burst in. And here he was. This zombie's appearance was drastically different from the others. It looked much more dangerous, and its claws were much longer and its teeth sharper. The men immediately recoiled, not expecting the monster to move so fast. They were all confused by the wrinkles on its forehead and thought it wasn't a zombie. After a while, Tongxi informed Zhen that their staff still hadn't returned. She assumed that they had managed to find a way out after all. But the chairman did not believe that they could have such traitors working in their company, so she justified them by saying that it was a difficult path and they had not stayed long. Tianlei mocked her, saying that she believed such nonsense because the ventilation ducts were narrow and it was impossible to stay there. They were already with the zombies. Then Tongxi shouted to him that he had to save the people if he thought they could not get out of the clutches of the multitudes on their own. The hope was in them. Xiaoyang was angry at their insolence. Not only did they steal their food, but they were not ashamed to ask for their help again. This was already the height of selfishness. She didn't understand how he could say that, because people's lives had always been more precious than food. But he stood his ground, saying that it didn't matter who he was, they had stolen from them. And unexpectedly for him, Tianlei supported her, saying that it wouldn't be difficult for them to save more people. It wasn't impossible for them, actually. Zhen's eyes showed the belief that they were really willing to help. Despite their enmity and conflicts, she believed in their kindness of heart. But it wasn't that simple. Tianlei crossed his arms and told her to beg him to go to their people and see if they were safe and needed help. The girls were furious. Tongxi said that the chairman would not stoop to begging anyone for anything. It was not in her purview at all. He threw up his hands and said that she, being a businesswoman, should realize that any service must be paid for. And if her people were important to her, she would sacrifice her dignity. Jen took a deep breath and lowered her head down and clarified that if she were to beg him, would he definitely save her employees. She was willing to do anything for them. With a smirk on his face, he snapped at her saying that when she complied with his request, he wouldn't go anywhere to save anyone's life. She got really pissed off. He stated that humans were not anti-zombie, but they were offering to go and fight them, saying they believed in them. He didn't think he was a pawn to listen to her. She was outraged that he was trying to trick her. She was about to start begging him, but as it turned out, that would have been done for nothing. But Tianlei taught her to be human. After all, she was always on top thinking she was better than everyone else. And for ordinary people, her decisions could turn their entire lives upside down. He turned away from her and told her that the world had changed, and her pride was no longer important. She shouted a few unpleasant words at him. As they walked out the door, Cheng Yao suggested that he help them after all. She knew that if there was a chance that they encountered zombies, he would not leave them. He reasoned that he couldn't look at Jen, who was asking for help without sincerity. He needed to teach her a lesson. However, the girls still thought that they would have no trouble getting the three people out. After all, they were handling a lot of zombies. Then she kissed him on the cheek as a sign that she believed in him and his good heart. She wished he was her hero to go and save whoever needed to be saved. He didn't really appreciate her gesture. He was embarrassed in front of Xiaoyang, and it was not the right time for such affection. She just looked away and said with a proud head that she had decided to thank him in advance and to express her love once again. Tianlei was startled and embarrassed by her words. He wasn't ready for such a serious thing. It was difficult for him to confess his love to someone besides he had Xinyu. Cheng Yao smiled as she shared her joy. For her, this was the first time Tianlei accepted her decision without question or argument. He simply agreed to it. Xiaoyang was sure they would go together to rescue them, but he said he wanted to go alone and advised him to protect the girls who were in the building. As he was about to separate from them, Tianlei reminded them that if the zombies got to this place, they would have to hide in some room and wait for him. Xiaoyang, like a real man, said that everything would be fine and it was not them to worry about. And Cheng Yao, like a real woman, stayed behind to wait for him. Eventually, he reached a place where there were grates covering the vents. So he understood where people were coming from, but he couldn't figure out where they had gone. Suddenly, he smelled the pungent odor of blood. Thanks to his keen sense of smell, he realized where it was coming from. So he came to the back room where they were eating. As he looked around the room, he began to take apart the boxes that were stacked one on top of the other. When he finally reached the floor, he saw them on it. Male colleagues from the company were lying on top of each other. It was obvious that they could not be saved. He watched their already lifeless bodies. But there was still one problem. He immediately armed himself with his axe, realizing that he was not alone in the back room. Those who had done it were close by, for their sounds could be heard quite clearly. When he turned around, he saw him, an incredibly fast zombie. Previously, he had only encountered stupid and slow ones, but this one had evolved. He also noticed their red eyes. They had mutated, and their bodies had become more sensitive, and they were faster and stronger. But that wasn't the most important thing. They were far more dangerous than regular zombies, and as such, they were the biggest threat to mankind. It was a good chance to study them for the future. With a disgruntled face, Tianlei began to provoke the zombie to show him what he was capable of. He needed to evaluate its strength. In a second, the zombie was already at his side. Its claws were a millimeter away from his chest, but since he wasn't so simple, he managed to dodge every attack. He realized that this mutant was indeed a powerful opponent. His attacks were difficult to parry, but he managed to avoid his attempts to bite Tianlei. He did a nifty somersault and tried to trick the zombie into running under him, hitting him over the head with his axe. But the zombie was not so stupid and could avoid his blows. Then once again, when the zombie ran at him, Tianlei flung him further away, making it seem as if he had managed to run out of the room by closing the door. The zombie really believed it and started thrashing around, while Tianlei sat on the shelf above and waited for the right moment to attack. And he succeeded. He hit the monster in the head with his axe, jumping on top of it. He wondered why he needed such speed if he was so inattentive. Suddenly, where the axe had been stuck, he found an object he didn't understand. Some kind of white stone, but he had no idea what he was doing there or why. The virtual god congratulated Master O for finding his first core. Tianlei couldn't understand why it only appeared at times like this, scaring him. The nucleus was a crystal formed in the brain of a mutated zombie. It wasn't in the normal ones, so he hadn't seen it before. The cores ranged from low to high levels, namely white to black, for a total of 8. They were used to increase experience and store skills. The white core in this zombie meant a normal mutation. He could trade it for a characteristic point or 10 experience points, and then he could get more of them. Then he realized that the virtual god hadn't bothered to tell him that before. Even a normal mutation was very strong if everyone was like this. There was no chance. But he reassured him by saying that it takes a lot of time and effort to mutate them. Few people make it to the end in the whole world. There will be no more than 10 of them. He still lashed out at the virtual god for not sharing such important information, but he was more concerned with how he was using the crystal. Tianlei thought about the fact that after the encounter with the mutant, he didn't need the characterization points yet. The experience points for killing zombies could be accumulated by themselves. Then he came to the conclusion that the more sensible solution would be to exchange it for some item in the store. I wanted to see the selection. The store system was activated and an image appeared in front of him that he could flip through and make a choice on his favorite item. The selection was so vast that his eyes were dizzy with weapons and food and other things that were useful to them, but he could only exchange the crystal for food. He was angry when he found out that this crystal was only used to improve or pay extra for products with points. For the rest, you needed a higher class. The virtual god clarified that he had already mentioned earlier that the store would involve an exchange. It was not enough to eat only one white crystal, but his points were also needed. Tianlei was not satisfied when the ring went back to sleep without fully explaining everything to him. He was sick of not telling him the important things. Then his gaze fell on the boxes of noodles. He smiled, realizing how naive Zhen was for not realizing that her staff had fooled her. He didn't hesitate because he knew that these foods were valuable. He had to pack them in his luggage and take them to Chengyao so that they could have a nice dinner together in the evening. Tianlei entered the room they were temporarily staying in and bowed in spite of himself, bragging that he had brought them a treat. But there was no reaction. When he looked up, he found that he was alone in the room. He wondered where his companions had gone, for everything seemed to be in order. Just then, he heard screams coming from the other room. Tianlei immediately rushed to follow their source. After all, his friends were not there, so they were in danger. As he ran, he thought there were zombies, but there weren't. It was worse when he ran into the room. In Xiaoyang's arms was Chen Yao covered in blood. Tongxi demanded that Yamada and Gu Weiping let the chairman go, saying that if they don't, they will definitely regret it later. Xiaoyang was already having a hard time. With tears in his eyes, he started shouting at them that if they continued to use her as a shield, he would send them both to the other world. Gu Weiping stood in front of the horrible picture of Yamada holding a knife to Zhen's throat. They threatened that if they made a move, she was finished. But Tianlei's first concern was not her at all, but Chen Yao. He ran up to her frightened because he was so worried about her condition without understanding what had happened. Xiaoyang started sobbing, looking at his comrade who was on the verge of hysterics. He admitted that he couldn't protect the girl, so he would accept all his accusations. Tongxi, seeing his condition and reaction, also said that the two men were able to cut the rope and escaped. They also took the chairman hostage, and Chen Yao decided to save Zhen Bingyang and threw herself under the knife. Unfortunately, the wounds she received were incompatible with life. But even in that state, the girl apologized to him for promising to wait obediently until he returned. But she couldn't keep her word. It was very hard for him to look at his loved one for the last time. He wanted to reassure her by saying that he was back after all and that she had managed to wait for him. Zhen Bingyang also began to cry as she realized that she was to blame for her death. She was very sorry that the girl had lost her life because of her. But Tianlei didn't want to hear a word from her. He started screaming hysterically, shutting her up. He asked why she didn't send her men instead of him. And he had to distract Chen Yao, who could still talk. She asked him not to be angry, saying that Xiaoyang was cornered and she was saving the staff. She seemed like she wasn't as bad as he thought, but actually a good leader. Looking back at Zhen, he just didn't know how to comment on it. Suddenly, Chen Yao started coughing and choking on her own blood. He asked her not to talk about anything else so he could stop the bleeding. Though it might not have been the right moment, she decided to remind him of an incident and tell him the truth. It was her last chance to speak up and walk away. She mentioned the very day she said she wanted to be his girlfriend, but it wasn't true, and she didn't love him at that moment. Hiding in the library, she was too scared to look for someone to protect her, but later she realized he was good and felt safe with him. Chen Yao admitted that she already knew she wasn't his favorite girl, but in order to always be by his side, she decided to become his teammate. But she couldn't be around anymore. She was sure that after her death, he would find a nice girl to do his laundry and cook noodles for him, and the only thing she wanted before she died was for him to promise never to forget her. She didn't need all the space in his heart, just a little piece of it. After those words, he began to scream with heartache. He promised her that he would always remember her. It was very hard for him to say goodbye to her. He didn't want to let her go. Holding his hand, she talked about how she had been through a lot in her life, but the best thing that had happened to her was meeting him. She was glad she did. He started to shake her, hoping she would just shut up, but no. They realized it was the last minute of Chen Yao's life. He wanted to throw up and throw down. Tears came to the chairman's eyes. She was terribly sorry for what had happened, but there was nothing she could do about it, standing with a knife at her throat. Yamada turned to Tianlei with a sneer, asking why he looked so sad. He pointed out that the girl was not bad, but she was no match for Jen. Then he offered him a deal, namely, that he would let them leave in peace, and he could use the chair in peace. They'd leave it to him. Tianlei stood with his fists clenched. He lowered his head while gathering his thoughts. After the death of a dear person, he wasn't ready to let things go. He was already right in front of them at an unreal speed. They were so frightened by his suddenness that they began to worry about what he wanted to do. Yamada felt threatened by him and said that if he made one more move, he would end Jin Bingyang's life. He didn't want to wait to see what he would do. But surprisingly, Tianlei didn't care. He was willing to let her be sent to the other world. Because of her, Chen Yao died. She should pay with her life. When Yamada heard that, he thought he was joking, but he didn't really want to do that. He hoped he'd let him go. But Tianlei still continued to insist that he do it and stop blackmailing the others. There was a look of consternation on the principal's face. He stood there for a couple of minutes and watched the fat man convulsively hold the girl and said that if he couldn't do it, he would do it himself. And he lunged at them. He grabbed Yamada by the hand he was holding the knife with, and it happened to be twisted in his direction, so he was risking his life at that moment. A small fight started between them, and Jin Bingyang managed to free herself from his greasy hands. She immediately ran to Tongxi, who calmed her down. Behind Tianlei was Gu Weiping, who grabbed the statue standing next to him. He had already swung to hit it on the head, wishing it to go to hell. But not before Tianlei, with his incredible reaction, kicked him in the face. The statue flew out of his hands and landed on his head. He decided to deal with the fat man differently. He did not immediately send him to the next world by grabbing him by the scruff of the neck and breaking his hands. There was an important conversation to be had. He first needed to know which of the two of them dared to inflict a mortal wound on Chen Yao before deciding what to do with them. In a second, he was beside Gu Weiping, repeating his question. He snapped his fingers, but he couldn't stand it, and admitted that Yamada had done it with the knife. Then Tianlei instantly returned to the principal and stuck that knife into his shoulder, asking him if it hurt. And Yamada was angered by Gu Weiping's representation. He yelled to him that he should have grabbed Jen Bingyang when she ran away from him. He should have taken his knife and grabbed her. Then things would have been different. But the chairman intervened and shared what she had seen firsthand. She said that Gu Weiping had deceived him, and it was really him who had ruined Chen Yao. He immediately started talking about how he didn't mean to do it, trying to scare her rather than hurt her. He didn't think she would rush to protect Jen's body. He fell to his knees and buried his head in the floor, sharing that he had a mother and a son, and that everyone was waiting for him. He begged for forgiveness because he didn't want to go to the other side. Tianlei was not convinced. After all, Chen Yao also had a family waiting for her, but he didn't spare her. Therefore, he didn't see the point of it either. But he was more favorable, so he wasn't going to ruin him. Even if he did it 100 times, it wouldn't make a difference. There was no bringing her back. It wasn't that simple, though. He had another way to deal with him and make him truly regret what he'd done. He grabbed his arm and dragged him down the hallway while Xiaoyang led Yamada. The rest of the company's employees also accompanied them, watching the execution. And here they came. Tianlei pressed the emergency evacuation button, which let out a loud sound throughout the building. It was very dangerous to do this for one reason, but no one immediately realized what he was doing it for. Everyone just plugged their ears to keep from hearing that disgusting ringing. He knew where it was going. There were a lot of zombies outside the building, and they all ran to that door on the siren. All that was left was to do what Chen Yao's killer deserved. Everyone was very scared. Yamada shouted for him to stop, afraid that the zombies were about to invade them. He didn't want to die at their hands. The girls were very surprised to see the faces of Wang Zhen and Zhao and the two zombies that were walking ahead. It was obvious that the bites had not escaped them. Then Tianlei opened the door and grabbed the frightened Gu Weiping. He didn't feel sorry for him in any way because he wanted to truly avenge her. Throwing him out, he immediately closed the door. That one began to pound on it and begged to let him back in. But Chen Yao was also suffering before her death. But more painful than that was the fear of waiting for it. Some did not immediately become zombies after the bite, but remained human for some time. And before Gu turns into a zombie, he'll be in creation and suffering. It's much worse than dying instantly because he'll feel everything. Tianlei enjoyed watching him being devoured from all sides. He wished he could enjoy the feeling of being torn to pieces. The others could not hold back their gag reflexes. They were so disgusted to see the zombies mercilessly eating their colleague. When Yamada started shouting mean things at him, calling him a devil, but Xiaoyang stood up for him. He reminded him of how hard he'd been through Chen Yao's death. Then the principal started begging them to die at the hands of the men. He didn't want the same fate as Gu Weiping, who would soon turn into a monster. But Tianlei hurriedly cut him off, saying that there would be a different punishment for him. Throwing him to the zombies would be too easy and predictable for them. First, he asked Xiaoyang to tie him up and lock him in the back room. He didn't have time to think about how to punish him, but he wanted to be more subtle. He turned around and was about to leave. When he passed by Jen Bingyang, she wanted to start making excuses again, but he didn't care at all. The chairwoman returned to her office and sat down in her chair and lowered her head. The staff member reminded her that Zhang and Jen had not returned. She didn't know what to do. The other girl started crying, saying that there were too many zombies in the building, and now there was definitely no way for them to get out. But Jen couldn't listen to it anymore. She told them that from now on, she was no longer their chairman, she just didn't deserve to be called that. And still, people disagreed with her. They began to confess that they themselves were responsible for it, because they were all responsible. Jen took a deep breath, saying that she was too excited, and if she had been calmer, she would never have made the decision to send them away. Abruptly, she jumped up from her seat and promised her men that she would make amends and protect them. It was the only thing she could do. With tear-filled eyes, she declared that no one else would go to the other side of the world. She would take care of everyone and would not allow impulsiveness. Meanwhile, Tianlei entered the room and sat in front of the sofa where Chen Yao's lifeless body lay. He didn't understand why she couldn't protect herself. He had always thought and told them that when there was any danger, they should think of themselves first. And she acted so impulsively. He looked at her and didn't understand how she could do such a thing. He wondered if there was something in Jen to save her at the cost of his own life. Shen Bingyang stood outside the door and listened to what he was talking about with a jar. She felt very sorry for him. His hearing was too perfect to miss her. Then she came out to him and came closer to him. The chairman shared that she had come to say goodbye to her for the last time because she had given her life for her. But Tianlei didn't want to hear it. He clenched his hand into a fist, even though he was about to hit her. He seemed to be willing to overstep his principles. She was remorseful, confirming that she knew he hated her, and it was her fault. Blame for the Yamada and vape incident. Suddenly her tears changed to screaming. She said the other people were innocent, started begging him to save them, to say anything about her, but to help them. Tianlei only slightly turned around calmly, asking her how it would help him. Insulting her would not bring back his beloved Chen Yao. In that case, with her eyes downcast, she decided to do something she'd been dreading for so long. In exchange for her help, she offered to let him do whatever he wanted with her. But he didn't pay attention to that. Talking about Chen Yao, who loved brand-name clothes but couldn't buy them, she was saving up, but the flash made her dream come true. And it seemed to him that what she'd been saving for was on Zhen. He wanted to put her in her dream dress, even when it was too late. She was stunned, not knowing what he was getting at. He despised her because Jen had sacrificed her life for her, and she'd clutched her clothes. But the chairman didn't want to be like that, so she promised to make it up to him and headed for the exit. But he stopped her and told her to undress in front of him. She was furious when she heard that. It seemed to her that he was doing everything to humiliate her, but she considered herself far above the others and could not stoop to such a thing. Tianlei reminded her that a moment ago she herself had offered to let him do whatever he wanted with her. Otherwise, it looked like she had no regrets. He admitted that he hated people like her the most, those who believe they are successful, prosperous in society, and enjoy their power. In his opinion, she is selfish when it comes to her interests. You can see her true colors. She thought those people were trash and had no responsibility for them. He also added that the only one who believed in her was Chen Yao. She thought she was a good and responsible person, and she was wrong. Such a fool. But Zhen Bingyang didn't deny that she thought she was better than everyone else. She was unwilling to bow down to a man being independent. But deep down, there were other values. She hadn't experienced such humiliation since she was a child, but today she was willing to put up with it to prove to him that she wasn't who he thought she was. She had never respected people before and was sure she was doing the right thing. She asked him to remember what he had promised her, and after saying that, she began to unzip the zipper of the dress that was on her back. She thought it would be the right thing to do in this situation, but Tianlei didn't even turn to her and just asked her to leave this place. He didn't want to take advantage of her, he just wanted her to finally realize everything. He realized that if her humiliation would bring Chen Yao back to life, he would have done it an infinite number of times. But it was pointless, really. Crying, she headed for the exit. He told her he would be in the conference room in half an hour to help her people. She was happy, but he made it clear that he would only do it for Chen Yao's sake, not anyone else's. After all, no matter how much he hated her, she always wanted to protect her. She was even embarrassed when he added that Zhen had to live in exchange for his friend's life. Otherwise, she would have gone to the afterlife for nothing. She stood there and listened to him talk. But at one point, Tianlei got tired and asked her to leave so he wouldn't have a chance to change his mind. He sat very close to Chen Yao. He realized that if he didn't help them, she would be very upset. He didn't know if they would be his burden or not. His eyes filled with tears. It was hard for him to look at her like that, but he was sure that when she left, she knew how important she was to him. When he found out he had to fight zombies, he was afraid. But she was always there to support him and believe in him. He thanked her and apologized. He apologized for not being able to protect her from rotten people. He picked her up in his arms to carry her to the right place to finish it all. He put her down by the railing and promised not to make her worry about him anymore. With those words, he began pouring fuel oil around her, and then he threw a lit lighter at her. He wished she'd gone to the afterlife and her body wouldn't be roaming the streets looking for a victim. The flames covered her body. Before he left, he said that she would forever be in his heart and he would never forget her. He made her that promise. Tianlei entered the conference room where they were already waiting for him. People were wondering if he really had a way to get them out of the building safely. Xiaoyang was worried that after that siren, there were a lot of zombies in the building. That is, the situation had become more unfavorable than when they entered. When Tianlei turned to Yamada, he became nervous. When Tianlei turned to Yamada, Yamada was nervous, and he fidgeted vigorously, afraid that something terrible would happen to him. But instead of answering him, Tianlei grabbed him by the scruff of his neck and lifted him off the chair. He immediately started screaming. To protect himself, he threatened him, saying that he was a famous person and he would regret it. And what was his surprise when he found out that no one was going to send him to the other world? On the contrary, they wanted to take him with them and save him as well, and that was only on the condition that he behave himself. Immediately after saying that, Yamada was silent and stopped fidgeting. He wanted to get out. The company director and the guys were crawling through the ventilation system. It was quite cramped because some were crawling on their knees and some were lying down. Xiaoyang felt that they had taken too many people with them, and it would be difficult to protect them. He also didn't understand why they had taken 2 foreign women and not left them behind. Tianlei said they didn't do anything wrong, so he decided to give them a chance to survive. And if they had left them behind, they would have been eaten by zombies anyway. Tongxi saw the zombies through the bars and started to panic. She was afraid that they wouldn't be able to get out of there alive, but Zhen supported and reassured her. The hour of reckoning had arrived. Tianlei wished Yamada good luck, implying that they were about to say goodbye to him. Their paths should be parted anyway. Suspecting why he was saying that, he immediately started screaming. He didn't understand what was wanted from him, but he felt something wrong. He begged me to let him go and not to kill him. But that was his fate. Even though he was tied up, he was thrown to the zombies as bait to taunt and distract them. They weren't sorry to risk his life. Yamada shouted for help, calling the zombies to him. Tianlei told the others to hurry while the monsters were distracted, so they gradually climbed out through another vent one by one. They didn't notice them as they were concentrating on the dangling target. The girls immediately rushed to the exit, but they were disappointed when they realized it didn't open, so they couldn't get through the main exit. Tianlei clearly didn't expect such a turn. In his mind, he had a completely different plan in which the doors were not locked. In the end, he had to come up with a plan B on the fly. Thankfully, Zhen Bingyang also joined in and took the lead, telling them that she knew where else there was a way out. They just needed to follow her. Yamada, meanwhile, continued to hang there, asking for help. The creatures literally under his feet were scaring him. He was scared out of his mind. The girls working for him heard his screams and decided to help. The girls working for him heard his screams and decided to help. He had never been so grateful to them. Yamada threw his arms around them because they were the only ones who hadn't passed by and saved him. But he wasn't the type to appreciate help. So after saying that he would take care of their families when he got home, he threw the girls out to feed the zombies. They were immediately jumped on from all sides. The dark-haired secretary screamed at him, not understanding how he dared to do this to them because they trusted him. He knew that only by having bait to attract zombies could he escape, and he thought they would be honored to sacrifice themselves for him. The guys had just reached the emergency exit. They had only a few meters left to get out and find some food. But there was a problem when the glass in front of them began to break from the bullets. They turned around and saw Yamada on the car with a gun in his hands. He was amused by their naivety. They'd thought they'd gotten rid of him by feeding him to the zombies, but he'd managed to get out and crawl into the vault. The flash in that vault is where he found the gun and even the car. He couldn't forgive them for wanting to leave him a zombie. Everyone was shocked by it. He wanted revenge for their despicable act, so he aimed his gun at them, trying to shoot them all. He was angry and happy at the same time. They tried their best to dodge his bullets. Tianlei didn't like Zhen Bingyang, but he still sheltered her, not wanting her to die. Yamada, with his evil laugh, was like a madman. He shot everything around him, wounding some people. He didn't want to leave a trace of them. Everyone was hiding to avoid the hot hand. Here was Zhen Bingyang hiding behind the dresser with Tianlei. He needed to catch his breath. And then Tongxi fell, just as he was talking about how they couldn't escape him, and he would finish off everyone present. The secretary was lying curled up on the floor at that moment. She was shaking with fear and begging for help as she realized that he was likely to shoot at her. Xiaoyang noticed this, and covering himself with a chair, he began to crawl towards her. He was annoyed that wherever this girl was, she was always causing trouble. Then he headed toward her. He dodged bullets by running and occasionally covering himself with a chair. He was doing a good job of it, after all, he had gotten to her. Xiaoyang took her into his arms. Tianlei called him over to them so that he could have a chance to hide quickly and avoid being shot at. Temporary shelter. When Tongxi was put on the floor, they immediately asked her if she was hurt. But she couldn't answer anything and just sobbed. She pressed herself into Xiaoyang's chest, thanking him for saving her life. He was even somewhat taken aback, as he didn't expect her to react so strongly. But there were still those who did not think of hiding more securely or did not have the opportunity to do so. Bullets hit a couple of female employees. The chairman couldn't just ignore it. She jumped out of hiding when she saw that Shushan and Xiaoye were injured. but Tianlei stopped her. While Yamada was mercilessly shooting at their men, the guys wanted to find out from Tianlei if he had any plan. It was just scary to watch. Even Xiaoyang began to panic. He hoped for his comrade's brilliant mind as he had no idea what to do sitting in a corner. But Tianlei himself knew perfectly well that he had to act. After all, it was only logical that the smell of blood would attract a huge number of zombies. We had to hurry up. The only thing he could think of was to use the virtual store, but whatever weapon he clicked on was unavailable to him because of the level. Confused, he begged the virtual god to lend him the necessary weapons. Because of the emergency situation, he had no time to decide anything. But he turned him down anyway, saying he couldn't do it. After all, rules are rules, and even he could not make an exception for him. The guys looked at Tianlei, who had his back turned to them and was waving his arms vigorously. They had already thought that he had gone crazy talking to himself. And so, after poking through hundreds of weapons, he finally came across an item he could acquire, a gasoline canister. He asked them to stay put and wait. This was only for the girls, but for Xiaoyang, he had a special assignment that he whispered in his ear so that no one would hear him. As Yamada made his way through the first floor, there were no people in his way, but he was still confident that he could handle them no matter how they hid. Suddenly, Xiaoyang jumped out from behind the reception desk and tried his best to attract the fat man's attention. He provoked him by waving his hands and insulting him. But Yamada liked it, because it was much more fun to chase after such a victim. He felt like even Kung Fu wouldn't help him dodge the car. Xiaoyang didn't try to dodge, he just ran very fast as if he was leading him to their destination. The main task was not to get hit by his shots. The director wasn't so stupid anyway. He immediately indicated that he had anticipated their actions and knew what it was all for. He wanted to kill Tianlei. Without hiding, he stood in front of Yamada holding his firearm. He was sure that despite that, he wouldn't succeed. The next time he fired, he hit the canister that Tianlei had bought not too long ago. It was obvious that this was what they were going to do. Thanks to his stupidity, the car exploded and burned Yamada's lifeless body to the ground. And thanks to that explosion, the glass separating them from the street shattered. Tianlei, like everyone else, watched this incredible sight with his hands covering his face and thought that Yamada really deserved such a horrible death. Xiaoyang admired his coolness because this principle was very dangerous. However, he still didn't understand where he got the canister from. He found it not far from them. Chen Bingyang walked over to the two lifeless bodies of her female employees and sobbed. Tongxi expressed her fears about the two of them being alone in the future. But then a girl crawled up behind them on her knees. Her eyes were filled with tears after what had happened to them. She couldn't believe she had survived. In joy, she rushed to hug the chairman and her secretary. They were happy to know that they were not alone and that the girl was all right. She sobbed against Tongxi's shoulder. She also confessed that she was very worried that they had gone to the other world and she would never see them again. However, the men decided to hurry them up, saying it was no time for sentimentality. The zombies will be here soon, and they should be gone by then. To leave in a truck that was practically parked near the entrance to the building, Tianlei had no trouble starting it. It was running, so there was a chance of escape. Xiaohei couldn't calm down and pestered Zhen, calling her chairman with her questions about what to do next. Their plans were unknown, but she was in no hurry to answer her. First of all, she made it clear that she should never be addressed as chairman again, but simply as Binyan. Xiaoyang interrupted their dialogue by saying that if they had nowhere else to go, then they could go along with them. In any case, there were still some seats available. Tianlei wasn't very happy about his mercy, since he hadn't planned to take them with him. He didn't like that he had made such a decision without asking his opinion. Then Xiaoyang begged him with a pitying look, reminding him that there would soon be zombies, and they had nowhere to go. They couldn't leave them to die. The main argument that touched Tianlei's cold heart was that if Chen Yao were alive, she would never do such a thing and help the girls. Tianlei looked at their frightened faces and then turned away. After analyzing what he had just said, he let him act as he wished. Xiaoyang was very happy that his comrade had listened to him. With a smile on his face, he turned to the ladies, inviting them to sit in the van in the cell. It was the only place where they could fit. The co-worker put her arm around Zhen's waist. She was very pleased that they still had such a good relationship. She was pleased that she called her Bing Yang. For the first couple hours, the guys sat there in silence. After all they had been through, they could hardly find normal topics of conversation. It was all the same in their heads. The silence was interrupted by Tongxi, who was interested in asking Xiaoyang a question. Since he had saved her several times, she wanted to talk. She was curious how Tianlei and Chen Yao were related to each other. She knew that those two were students from the same college, but he was from a different place. He didn't deny anything, saying that he really wasn't a student. His whole life had been devoted to martial arts. He thought she despised him. Abruptly, she was beside him. Tongxi didn't despise him, but admired him. After all, a guy who does this is strong and reliable, unlike a student. He was embarrassed by her words. He blushed and looked away from her, saying that she was exaggerating. But she didn't feel that way at all. He shared with them that he met Tianlei when he and his younger sister were trapped by zombies in a supermarket. It was a difficult story for him. After swallowing the lump in his throat, he went on to say that Tianlei had saved them and helped him bury his sister. He had called him Big Brother ever since. Tongxi had been looking at him all this time without taking her eyes off him. She decided that the Big Brother was really good, since he had been talking without being rude all this time. The girls listened to him in silence. Finally, he turned to Tianlei's relationship with Chen Yao. It was silly to bring it up when she was no longer with them, but he did tell them that he had heard from Chen Yao that he liked their college star Shen Xinyu. Tongxi joked that Bingyang had no chance, and yet what she was gradually leading up to did not leave her mind. She decided to ask him about his relationship, if he had a girlfriend he liked. It was one of his sore subjects. Scratching his temple with nervousness, he admitted that he had broken up with her not long ago. Tongxi was glad to know that he was free. She didn't hesitate and moved even closer, wrapping one arm around his neck. Flirtatiously, she announced that from today she would be his girlfriend. He certainly didn't like that suggestion. He was so scared and surprised that he even opened his mouth. Sweat was running down his face, and he was so nervous. She didn't understand his reaction at all. She thought he would be happy to know that there was a girl who loved him and wanted to be with him. Tongxi grabbed his hand, saying that girls like cool. Moreover, he had saved her, so he was responsible for her. Xiaoyang didn't agree. She was very surprised by this. And standing up so that her figure was pronounced, she asked if he was not attracted to her athletic body in any way. Xiaoyang was shocked by everything that was happening and could hardly find the words. She didn't torture him and decided to give him some time to think. But not a moment later, Tongxi pressed herself against him and rested her head on his shoulder, formally told Xiaohei and Bingyang that they would be their witnesses. Witnesses that he was her boyfriend. And grabbing him by the ear, the girl said that if he let her down, his friends would punish him. He was surprised by her behavior and actions. This interesting dialogue was interrupted by Tianlei, who stopped and opened them. He said that they would spend the night in this place, and tomorrow they would go on their way. Tongxi looked around, but still couldn't figure out where they were. Xiaohei assumed they were staying in the suburbs, but Zhen Bingyang immediately guessed that this was a research area that had been moved to the suburbs because of the low price of land in the city. Xiaohe wondered where they planned to spend the night. Even though the area was unfinished and there were no people there, the dining hall was ready, so they would be there. When Tianlei started to move away from them, heading towards the dining room, he took his hand aside and said that they would spend the night there if the revered miss agreed. Bingyang was angered by his teasing, but she took Xiaohei's hand and followed him anyway. She thought she could handle anything, but he underestimated her. Xiaoyang immediately looked in the refrigerator and made sure that the vegetables had not spoiled yet. This meant that they had a chance to eat dinner before going to bed. He turned to the girls, wondering which one of them would cook the meal. They were all embarrassed, and none of them wanted to volunteer so as not to embarrass themselves in front of them. In the end, Xiaohei decided to take the hit and not leave the men hungry. She said she could cook them something, but not that they would like it. Then Tianlei stepped in. He shouted to her that it was not important whether they liked it or not, as the main thing was not to die of hunger. She was glad to be supported. Hoping to find some canned food, she ran to the kitchen. This time, she wanted everyone to have a good meal, because they still had a lot to do. And Xiaoyang suggested that Tianlei drink some beer to relax a little. There were so many things going on that he needed a distraction. But Tianlei was not very supportive of the idea. He rarely drank, and at a time when zombies could be close by, he didn't want to relax. But he still offered to open the can. He said that if he didn't want it, he would drink it himself. He took a sip and felt an unreal pleasure, and the way he was acting, the way he was smacking his head, convinced Tianlei to join him. He was glad that he had managed to persuade his comrade to have a drink. Tongxi, meanwhile, suggested that Zhen Bingyang wash the vegetables since they refused to cook. It was a good opportunity to have a private and heart-to-heart chat. She really wanted to know if she was really thinking of becoming Xiaoyang's girlfriend. Tongxi repeated it again, and didn't understand why the question suddenly arose. Binyan felt that she had started talking about it and confessing to him too harshly. They had only recently met, and it was strange. The secretary didn't see anything wrong with it. She was sure that although he wasn't a rich unknown, he had a good heart. She noticed that right away. After a moment's silence, she decided to tell the truth. She wanted to have someone she loved to protect her. She remembered when those things grabbed them. They couldn't do anything. They were screaming for help. It was then she realized how weak she was in this world and without men. Tongxi looked back at him when he laughed. She saw him as a kind and strong man, so she confessed to him. He wouldn't hurt her. Safe. Binyan was very surprised when her friend told her to take action too, and not to miss her happiness. She tried not to think about it herself. But Tongxi has analyzed everything. Even though Tianlei is a poor student, but at this time of outbreak, he is a real man in demand in a woman's eyes. She was sure she had to act soon before it was too late. Otherwise, if she didn't take it for herself, another girl would pick up the gift. Binyan didn't think it was right. Her friend looked like a zombie hunting strong men, but she put aside the jokes and wanted to be serious. Even though Tongxi thought she was great standing on the pyramid, she herself knew what it was like to be at the bottom. She knew what it was like to be humiliated and insulted. It also drew her attention to the way Xiaohe was acting. Usually she was more reserved in the office, but this day she seemed like a completely different person. But so that she wouldn't take her words the wrong way, she added that Bingyang was much prettier than her. And if Tianlei didn't notice that, then he was blind. After Bingyang listened to her friend's monologue, she reminded him that he hated her with all his soul after the incident with Chen Yao. His attitude towards her had been seen by everyone. Tongxi, on the other hand, saw the situation very differently. If a man hated her, he would ignore her, but he treated her and cared for her. When she finally asked her if she was thinking about him herself, Binyan said with frightened eyes that it was impossible, complete nonsense, and her heart was pounding. She still didn't believe her. It was the first time she saw Binyang trying to hide her emotions. Still, she advised her to think about it before it was too late. As soon as they finished speaking, Tongxi went to the table where the men were sitting. She asked Xiaoyang, calling him her husband, to help her because her arms were tired, and Tianlei didn't know what was going on in the truck, that they were in a relationship. Xiaoyang asked not to laugh because he was responsible. Abruptly, their pleasant surroundings were replaced by uneasiness. Tianlei heard some unpleasant sounds that usually came from zombies, but this time it wasn't them. Xiaohe was lying on the floor, and on top of her was a particularly aggressive animal that looked like a dog or a wolf. It was unclear. The bloodied Xiaohe told them to run away from here. Tianlei wasn't going anywhere. He asked Tiaoyang to take the girls away while he was left alone with this. He didn't mind getting out of there because there was something inexplicable in front of them. He grabbed the girls by the arms and headed for the exit. Tianlei used his axe as usual. He swung and hit the monster with the first swing, leveling it. The monster started whimpering, but that didn't stop him either. He became even more aggressive, his teeth bared and his eyes glowing red. With a deep wound on his side, he aimed at Tianlei in an attempt to destroy him. He, in turn, was not feeling well after drinking, but he was still able to notice that the dog was moving faster than the zombie. Looking at this monster with long and sharp claws and teeth, he realized that it would be very dangerous to fight with him. It was necessary to take him away. In the next second, Tianlei rushed to run away, and the beast naturally followed him. He clearly had some ingenious plan to get rid of the dog. Meanwhile, Xiaoyang and the ladies were heading to the staff room. He decided that they would stay there, and he would return to help his big brother. Suddenly, Tiaohe appeared in their path. Her head was down and her face was covered by her hair. She moved slowly toward them as if she needed help. They were very surprised because they had seen the dog attack her and could not believe that she had survived. They certainly wanted to believe that she was all right, but it just couldn't be so. When she lifted her head, they observed her gray-blue face, huge, sharp teeth, and a nasty scream. She had become a zombie. When the monster ran at him, he prepared himself. Xiaoyang would never have resorted to treating the girl like this, but he had to kick her. Tianlei had a tougher task. He ran confidently through the kitchen, but in his heart he was worried that the dog wouldn't be so stupid and wouldn't fall for it. But he got lucky. When he jumped on the kitchen cupboard, the dog was confused. He started looking around, not realizing where he'd gotten to. In the end, after a little barking and growling with anger, the dog decided to take a break. He was sure that the man was somewhere close and would not miss him. Tianlei felt funny because the dog really believed that he had disappeared. He started shouting to attract her attention to him. She woke up immediately. They ran back and forth in the kitchen, until at one point, Tianlei tricked her and jumped on the cabinet again. Without expecting it, the dog's head hit the furniture. Instantly, he was behind her with an axe. Without a second thought, he struck it, severing its head from its body. He received 2 experience points for killing the zombie dog. But Tianlei was indignant upon hearing about his reward. He had expected to receive 10 points, not 2, but the system refused to bargain with him and gave him 2. He couldn't accept that and decided to dig into the dog's head to find the core. Since it was stronger than that zombie, it had a better core. But no. The virtual god explained to him that the dog was only stronger because the genetic species was different, but the core in them couldn't be. Tianlei started to freak out, and just at that moment, Xiaoyang walked in. He didn't understand who his brother was talking to. Tianlei decided to say that he often liked to talk to himself, and then he saw the decapitated dog. He was shocked that he had managed it alone and wanted to learn the same way. Tianlei promised to show him next time. Tianlei asked where he had taken the girls. Xiaoyang explained that they had gotten zombie blood on them, and he had sent them to wash it off in the toilet. They were very surprised that there were no zombies in this place, but there could be other dangers besides them, so Tianlei advised them to be careful. While he was thinking about the fact that he was no longer proficient with zombies and that he needed to level up, Xiaoyang thought about who was going to cook their food now, but Tianlei rolled his eyes at that. Without much trouble, he cooked a nice noodle with vegetables. Tongxi appreciated it and said it smelled delicious. When she asked him how he did it, Tianlei said he couldn't cook, but just threw all the food into the noodles. They did it all the time in the dormitory. Still, it was as if Tongxi couldn't stop with her compliments. She reiterated that his wife would be very happy with him. And when she switched to her hubby, saying that he should learn it too, Xiaoyang was puzzled. He thought it was a woman's business. She couldn't agree with him. After all, very creative girls should be making brand-name clothes, not cooking. And this difficult job was for men. Tianlei decided to let them know right away that he didn't care who they were before. The times when they were chairman and secretary were over. He was unwilling to leave those who caused trouble. No one wanted to pamper them like they were used to. And if they were going to do nothing, they'd better leave right away. Tongxi was frightened by his tone, so she immediately said she was joking. But Binyang got angry and said that they didn't plan to follow them. She screamed furiously when she realized that they were going to be kicked out. Tongxi tried to calm her down, explaining that she'd had too much to drink. But she continued. She jumped up from her seat and, pointing her finger at Tianlei, decided to say that he had always mocked her. Being saved doesn't mean it's okay to insult. Binyang understood all his hints because he claimed he was right, that she refused to cook. But she didn't consider herself a ballast. He genuinely didn't care. He looked at her without emotion, and she tearfully talked about how hard it was for her. She had spent a lot of time on the business trying. Tongxi even started crying from her speech. Binyang talked about putting in as much effort as the others. She didn't understand why he was saying that. She struggled so much, she worked hard and managed to enter the market. In the evening, she worked hard as there were no workers. She had to go it alone. After she said that, Tongxi took her under her arm and led her to her room to rest, since she had obviously had too much alcohol, even though she didn't think so herself. Xiaoyang also paid attention to his comrade, whose eyes were already closing. He assumed that he was tired, and it would be good for him to rest too. Binyang was hysterical when they put her on the bed. She didn't want Tongxi to leave her alone, but she said she wasn't going to leave her alone. It was too dangerous to leave her behind because she was already delirious. She waved her fists, saying that she could handle the zombies herself and that they didn't need men. Then she knelt down and took Tongxi's hands. She said that tomorrow they would leave together, and she would protect her. Tongxi was agreeing with her in every way, and Bingyan thought of Tianlei once again. He seemed nasty, arrogant to her, the most hateful in the world. However, she didn't realize how else she thought of him. She ended up throwing up. Tongxi decided to go out to look for a change of clothes. After a while, Binyan grabbed her head, which started to hurt. She couldn't understand how she ended up in the room because she was in the dining room. Then she remembered how they were sitting at the table. She had a drink and spoke out in front of everyone. Binyang sat on the bed, covering her face. She was incredibly ashamed of her behavior. She didn't understand why Tongxi didn't stop the flow of words. At the same time, a rather drunk Tianlei was walking down the corridor heading to his room. He sent Xiaoyang away, confident that he would get there on his own. He staggered along, amazed that he was so drunk on beer that his head was spinning. He remembered from his dormitory days that beer and fondue was a good thing. Suddenly, he remembered their companions. It was important for him to check if they were all right, because he didn't remember how their evening had ended. The image of his beloved Sheng Xinyu surfaced in front of his eyes. She was as beautiful as ever with her long blue hair and gorgeous figure. As he passed by Zhen Bingyang's room, he decided to peek in through the slightly open door. He saw her from the back as she was taking off her clothes. His cheeks immediately flushed with embarrassment. So gorgeous was this girl's form that he just couldn't tear his gaze away. Xinyu. When she heard him, she started screaming, as if a pervert had been watching her change clothes. She couldn't understand who was there and what he wanted from her. Tianlei saw his beloved Shen Xinyu in front of him, her sweet smile and languid gaze. He felt as if she was gently calling his name to him. He stared at her with his mouth hanging open. He couldn't believe his happiness because he began to doubt that she was standing in front of him, his enchanting love. Binyang covered her breasts with a towel and didn't understand how he dared to enter her at a time like this. She asked him not to come near her. He pulled her against him very tightly. Tears came to his eyes. He admitted that he was worried about her and asked her never to leave again. He said he loved her. She pushed him away, thinking he was joking. Binyang had always thought he hated her and couldn't believe his abrupt declarations of love. He was dumbfounded when he heard of any hatred, for he had been warm to her for a long time and thought of her constantly. Frightened, she held the towel and tried to find out why he had been walking around with a sad face all this time and not even looking at her with such feelings. Tianlei admitted that he just didn't dare. After all, she was a goddess with a lot of admirers. But he couldn't do anything because he didn't think he was worthy. But it was different now. He wasn't who he was anymore. He'd promised her he'd use his power and spare his life to save her. Binyang remembered Tongxi's words that one should not miss one's chance, especially when there was a man ready to protect and give everything for her. It was him, just in case. She decided to see if he was telling the truth. He put his hand on her cheek and asked her to stay with him to prove it. They kissed. Their conversation did not end with just a kiss. When he woke up in the morning and saw Tongxi and Xiaoyang in his bed, he thought they were zombies. But they actually just went in to check on Binyan and found them naked. They were embarrassed to point fingers at them, but it was a shock. Tianlei looked at himself and Zhen Bingyang at their clothes lying on the floor and recoiled. He didn't understand how he had spent the night alone. And at that moment, Tongxi jumped on him. She was outraged because he took advantage of her friend while she was changing. That's low. While he was throwing on his shirt, Xiaoyang also decided to quietly ask him if it was true that he had done so. But Tianlei had nothing to say. He admitted that all he remembered was being dizzy after the beer and trying to find a room to sleep in, but then images of that night came back to his mind. Tianlei covered his face with his hand in shame. He had no idea how it had happened, because it seemed to be under control, but the alcohol had made itself felt. Tongxi started yelling at him, judging him because she thought he wanted to say he was drunk and not admit his guilt. If he doesn't remember, it didn't happen. And then Binyan, who was turned to the window, stepped in. She asked her to calm down and said that it wasn't what she thought it was. It was different. She turned to Tianlei and explained that he didn't have to feel guilty because they were adults. They are capable of taking responsibility for themselves. Xiaoyang pointed out to him that even the girls had realized it. He argued that as a man, he had to take responsibility for what he had done. Tianlei looked at him with judgment. After all, if he hadn't made him drink, nothing would have happened. He wouldn't have confessed his love to her with consequences. When Binyang heard this, she was upset. He apologized to her and said that he admitted his guilt and asked her not to worry. He did not deny his responsibility. She felt incredibly hurt when she found out that the words about love and protection at the cost of life were not dedicated to her at all, but to another girl named Shen Xinyu. Unable to control her emotions and feeling as if she were being taken advantage of, she slapped him. She wanted to burst into tears, which she did. As soon as he headed towards the exit, the sounds of gunfire came from the street. Xiaoyang was surprised that there was some kind of gunfire because there were no people around. Tongshai was more optimistic, deciding that a rescue team had finally arrived to help them reach the survivor base. Tianlei was sure it wasn't them, but to find out for sure, he and Xiaoyang had to go outside and see what was going on. He turned to the girls, telling them to stay where they were and to hide in a safe place. With a steady step, they moved toward the sound. A group of people were carefully running away from the zombies up the stairs. One guy was wounded, so they had to drag him to keep him from being eaten. The one in front of them called out to the guy holding the wounded man. He noticed that he was in a bad way, so he wondered what they were going to do with him. The barely alive young man asked Xuan to leave him and run away. He was too heavy a burden. He was afraid that because of him, they just wouldn't be able to leave. But Xuan was against it, saying he was talking nonsense. He was sure that everything would be fine, but he just had to get away from the zombies, and they had weapons. He would occasionally pop out from behind a tree to shoot a few of the creatures. He was more comfortable being there because he had left the wounded man sitting there. Also, hiding behind a tree, the other was supporting him, saying that he was doing well, just like a real sniper. There was also a girl there with him. But unfortunately, the ammo wasn't infinite. And just as they ran out, a zombie knocked him down. He tried to hold the monster's hand so it wouldn't scratch him. When he saw that his brother, Xiao Chao, was also attacked by a zombie in parallel, he started shouting at him. After all, he was completely defenseless with his pain. Suddenly, out of nowhere, help came. When the zombie was a few centimeters away from its victim, an axe flew into its head. Xiao Zhao was startled. Xiaoyang asked Tianlei to leave some zombies for him. He really wanted to prove himself and practice. This was a very good opportunity. He took his axe and stood up, letting his comrade practice. It was no problem for him. On the contrary, he was glad to be so eager. One of the men who sat behind the tree was surprised to find those who were not afraid of zombies and enjoyed killing them. His hair stood on end. Tianlei called out to the people standing in a stupor. He told them to hide in the cafeteria that was behind them. They were of no use anyway. Xuan picked up his friend and looked at their saviors full of gratitude. Li Yichuan's boyfriend and the girl had already headed to the right place. When Tianlei defeated dozens of zombies, he felt extra strength. Finally, he gained the right amount of experience and raised his level. The virtual god was pleased to congratulate him for moving to a new class. It meant that his strength had increased several times over. Xiaoyang was worried about him when he saw that he was distracted when several zombies flew at him. He didn't even come close to realizing that he wasn't the one who should have been afraid. After preparing his favorite weapon, Tianlei turned to the zombies. He decided to try out his new powers, and as you could see, there were a lot of people willing to do so. With a single sweep of his arm, he ravaged them. His speed became unbelievable, and he felt boundless power. His reactions improved several times over. Upgrading to a new class was something. He already felt like a superhero, and now he felt like he was invincible, and every zombie in his path was finished. Xiaoyang stood with his sword, with his mouth hanging open, and watched Tianlei kill 10 zombies per second. He was amazed at his strength and couldn't understand how he did it.